Good evening, everybody. It's a Wednesday, and I don't know about you, but I'm really happy that it's a Storytime stream. I've been really looking forward to this. I know not everybody was here when I started reading this story 2 weeks ago, but I'm glad for those of you who are here. We're going to continue this evening with chapters 4 to 6. And for anybody who might be new to the channel, my name is Meshla. I am primarily an audiobook streamer. What that means for me is that I write and read my own Star Wars fanfiction, and I have been doing so for the last 25 years, and still going strong. So tonight we're going to continue with Steps into the Past, chapters 4 to 6. And I hope everybody enjoys. I will warn you, I did put a content warning on this stream because this story in particular, and actually a couple of my other ones, are kind of heavy on combat and can be a little graphic. I do try to keep it PG-13, but I did stick that warning on there just for anybody who might be sensitive to those kinds of things. So. Let me get myself situated here. Oh. I'm also not using the prompter this evening because I'm still getting used to how it works. And with as long as my chapters are, I will pretty much have to paste the entire text of all 3 chapters in to the prompter screen. So I unfortunately was not able to do that, so I'll be reading directly from the Google Docs this evening. So I do apologize for that. So if you see my eyes moving around a little bit more than they did the last time I was reading, that would be why. I'm still getting used to the fact that I have the prompter. So, alrighty. Steps into the Past, Chapter 4, Ghosts in the Wind. The wardroom was still as IT's final words faded, his voice low and even despite the warning he'd just given about the next run. The hum of the ship's life support was the only sound in the pause that followed, broken faintly by the distant thrum of sublight drive, shifting pitch in a steady, purposeful rhythm. The debrief holomap winked out under his touch, lines of blue and green retreating into nothingness as he cleared the table, its surface now only reflecting the overhead lights and the hard planes of his face. Marin sat a few seats back from the rest, perched lightly on the edge of the bench, as though staying ready to spring to her feet at a moment's notice. She hadn't said much during the debrief. Truth be told, she hadn't needed to. Her focus had been on memorizing every word, every slight shift in tone from the captain, every twitch of fingers marking a line on the holomap. Her hands were busy, restless even, turning the second set of tags over and over between her thumb and forefinger. Her tags, not Jarius's. They weren't borrowed, they were earned, but they still felt heavy around her neck. She knew the captain still had questions about her place here, about the wisdom of bringing a Jedi, barely past Padawan, in on a Marine exchange program. She wasn't naive enough to think she'd changed his mind yet, no matter how clean the first run had gone. The best she could do was show him what she was worth, one mission, one breath at a time. She was mid-thought when the klaxon split the silence, 2 sharp pulses reverberating off the Durasteel bulkheads. Every head in the room came up at once, a collective tightening of shoulders, spines straightening, eyes snapping toward the overhead speaker before the voice of Commander Travers rolled through in a crisp, measured tone. All decks, Condition 2, alert. All decks, Condition 2, alert. Captain IT, to the bridge. The air shifted. Marin's boots hit the deck with a heartbeat later, her tag stilled in her hand, instincts dragging her upright before thought could catch up. The easy rhythm of a post-brief lull vanished, replaced by a low, thrumming tension that ran along her nerves like a current. This wasn't a drill. She felt it before she even understood why. IT's expression flattened to something hard and unreadable as he reached for the projector controls, shutting the system down with a flick of his fingers that was sharper than usual. Marines to the hangar. Check your gear, he ordered, his tone clipped, leaving no room for questions. I'll go topside and see what's going on. Marin's teeth found her lower lip as she pulled her pack close, swinging it over her shoulders with a practiced motion. Fresh supplies, a fresh power pack. Her knife edges honed and her saber within reach. Her mind took over the checklist as she slipped into the corridor, her boots whispering over the deck. She'd learned long ago not to waste time asking questions no one had answers to. Her gut spoke louder than words. It didn't feel like a training signal. Down on the hangar deck, the atmosphere had already shifted. Marines settled on supply crates or leaned against bulkheads, every one of them with their gear open, hands working in that calm, methodical way soldiers had when they were waiting for orders they couldn't yet hear. The banter from earlier was gone, replaced by a low hum of comms checks and magazine swaps, the occasional muted click of a sidearm being locked back into place. Marin found herself a spot near the edge of a cargo pallet, setting her pack down to run through her own checks. Her movements were precise, but tension curled along the edges of her awareness. She wasn't the only one who felt it. Cure itself seemed to feel it as well, the deck subtly alive under her boots as the engine shifted pitch yet again, holding their high orbit like a predator holding its breath. And somewhere nearby she could feel him. Greer hadn't sat down. He didn't need to. He moved with that same unshakable calm he always did, leaning casually against a bulkhead where he had a clear line of sight to every hatch, every marine, every possible angle someone might come through. It looked effortless, like just another marine killing time while the bridge sorted out a call, but Marin knew better. His watchfulness was a living, breathing thing, quiet and coiled, never more than a breath from action if the world decided to go sideways again. Meanwhile, above them, IT stepped onto the bridge, scanning until his eyes found Reitman. The Cure's captain stood at the navigational table, one hand on the console, the other gesturing toward the holographic projection of the border system. The atmosphere was all business. Quiet voices, clipped reports, every officer focused on their panel but alert in that particular way that only came when something real was happening. What's going on? IT asked, his voice low but sharp. All Marine now. No trace of briefing room formality. Reitman didn't waste time. He pointed at a marked sector on the map, a star fading on the outer rim of a territorial space. Distress signal, he said. Small colony on the fringe. Weak enough we almost missed it. We're the closest ship to their position. My signals officer doesn't think anyone else even heard it. The captain's eyes narrowed, looking from the hologram to the man at comms. How weak? Barely enough to scrape together coordinates, the officer replied, fingers tapping rapidly over his console as he pulled up a fuzzy waveform, static-laced and faltering. If it weren't for a long-range sweep running hot, it would have vanished into the comm noise. It doesn't even match the power output of a proper emergency beacon. It could be damaged, could be interference, could be intentional. On the hangar deck, Marin's hand stilled on her carbine as a subtle shiver ran up her spine. She didn't know the details yet, but she didn't need them. Something in the force twisted at the edges of her awareness, faint but wrong, like a thread that had been tugged and was waiting to snap. She closed her eyes for a heartbeat, drew in a breath, and forced her hand steady again. One piece of gear at a time, knowing full well that whatever this was, it wasn't going to stay simple for long. The air on the hangar deck was never truly still. Even still, with the great bay doors sealed tight, there was a pulse to it, a low thrumming heartbeat that came from drives and power conduits, and the weight of a warship never fully at rest. But now, there was another pulse beneath it, a different kind of hum. Unease, quiet and coiled, roiling through every marine in the room without needing a word to give it voice. Marin felt it in the set of their shoulders, in the clipped efficiency of their movements as they went over gear they'd already knew by touch alone. No one wasted time with idle chatter. No one asked what was happening. They didn't need to. Condition 2 alerts weren't raised for drills, not out here in the dark fringe where Republic and Katani lines blurred and the galaxy forgot to send patrols. She sat on the edge of a crate, her gear sprawled in neat lines at her boots, running through the same checks over and over because keeping her hands busy meant keeping her mind from running too far ahead. She kept her senses tucked in tight, a habit drilled into her long before she ever donned marine armor. But even reined in, she felt it. That faint, sour thread in the force, frayed and pulling like something wrong had reached out from the system below and brushed its fingers across her mind. She didn't shiver. She didn't let her body betray it. Instead, she glanced up, her eyes sweeping the deck without moving her head, just enough to mark where everyone stood, where the exits were, where Greer was. Master Sergeant Rennet Greer had claimed a patch of bulkhead near the bay doors, close enough to see everything, far enough to look like he wasn't watching anything in particular. He leaned one shoulder against the durasteel, his helmet tucked under one arm, the other hand loose by his side. Every line of his posture said relaxed veteran Marine waiting for orders, but Marin knew better. She'd seen him like this before, years ago in the barracks on Catan when Jarius had brought her by to meet his old unit. Greer had barely spoken to her then, just given her a nod and a faint approving smile as if he knew her story without needing to even hear it. She'd seen him again at the funeral after Galan, standing silent and squared like a pillar at the edge of the gathering, the kind of man who didn't need words to keep a space safe. And after Bastine. After Bastine, she'd woken more than once to find him nearby. Not hovering, not suffocating, but present. Always where he could move fast if he had to. Always where she could see him if she'd looked up. A quiet anchor in a world that had been stripped raw and left her breathless. He didn't need to say he was watching her six. It was just there, a fact as constant as gravity. Hello, Luna. Welcome in. My name is Meshla. Welcome into the stream. I'm reading one of my stories this evening. Welcome in. I hope you enjoy. Now on this deck, nothing else about it had changed. He stood where his eyes swept the whole space, casual, but ready, like every muscle beneath the uniform could shift into motion without needing permission. Every Marine in the bay trusted him to have their backs. Marin knew it went further than that. He had hers, specifically, and he always would. She caught his gaze for half a second across the hangar. No words, no tilt of the head, no nod. Just the steady, measuring presence that said he'd already taken stock of every exit, every rifle bolt, every shadow deep enough for trouble to hide in. And that if anything went wrong, really wrong, he'd be there before anyone else could move. Welcome in, Welts. Good to see you. Marin let out a slow breath through her nose, checking the charge on her carbine again even though she knew it was full, and bent to repack her kit. The tension wasn't easing. If anything, it was getting thicker, pressing against her skin, buzzing in her bones. She kept her senses muted, careful not to draw attention, but the wrongness was growing louder in the quiet parts of her mind. Something had happened out there on that colony. Something that had bled desperation into a faint distress call barely strong enough to reach them. Across the deck, Greer shifted just enough to rest a hand on the strap of his rifle. Casual, unhurried, but Marin caught it. It was a silent message that needed no words. Stay sharp, kid. Something's coming. And in that heavy, waiting quiet, Marin believed him. Signals in the dark. The deck still thrummed beneath their boots, the low hum of the ship's drive
We are
cycling up
greatly
as Kerr
honored by you,
shifted her
Pacific
course.
Ambassadors.
Beyond
Make
the sealed
yourselves
hangar,
comfortable. My master
100 million
will hold you
points of
shortly.
starlight lay indifferent, silent, and cold. Inside, every marine on the deck carried the same taut stillness beneath their armor, a coiled awareness sharpened by the call they hadn't yet heard, but could already feel pressing down on them like a weight in the chest. Thank you for the follow, Luna. I appreciate you. Marin hadn't moved far from her perch, but her pack was slung now, the weapon balanced across her knees, the lines of her body set in quiet readiness. She was breathing slowly, deliberately, pulling each breath down into her core the way Stefan had taught her, the way Jerry's had insisted when her nerves ran wild before an exercise. She had no illusions. Whatever waited out there wasn't going to be a drill. You didn't throw a distress signal that weak and broken into the void unless you were desperate, and desperation in this part of space usually came with blood on its heels. I do. I'm actually reading one of my fanfictions tonight. So, welcome in. Alright, give me just 1 second. Okay. She glanced once more to where Greer leaned against the bulkhead. He hadn't shifted much since she'd marked him earlier, just adjusted the line of his stance to face the hangar's center a fraction more. To anyone else, he looked like a man marking time. To Marin, he looked like a loaded rifle laid across a table. Unmoving, but never anything less than dangerous. Watching everything. Watching her. The hangar lights dimmed, white giving way to a muted blue wash that seemed to steal what little warmth the space had left. Cloak up. Every Marine knew the color shift by now. The silence in the room tightened by a degree, though nobody spoke. Marin swallowed hard, tamped down the flare of instinctive unease that wanted her on her feet, and found her center again. It wasn't fear that rose in her chest. It was memory, unbidden of another colony too far from help, of black armor and smoke and fire. She forced it down, anchored herself in the now, and held it there. The clatter of boots broke the tense quiet. Captain IT strode in from the lift, helmet tucked under one arm, his face set in that hard, unreadable line of an officer who hadn't had time to put any polish on the news he was about to deliver. His gaze swept the deck once, measuring every face before he stopped near the nose of the gunship and snapped his hand down in a signal to form up. Marin was on her feet instantly, slotting into the line without hesitation, her carbine locked across her chest. She felt the others settle in around her, some projecting eagerness, others with nerves running hot beneath their skin. She closed her eyes for a breath, reached for that calm center she'd learned to hold like a stone in her palm, and let it ripple outward, quiet and steady. If it eased even one heartbeat in the formation, it was worth the effort. Oh, thank you so much. I appreciate it. It's about to not get so calm. IT waited until the shuffle of boots died into stillness. Then he spoke, voice carrying across the hangar without need for volume. The ship picked up a faint distress signal from one of our neighboring systems, he began, his eyes sweeping the line, making sure each Marine's attention was on him. We may have been the only ones who received it. Captain Reitman has already informed Fleet Command, but we're the closest ship on station. That makes this ours to answer. A murmur ran down the line, but died quickly. IT led it, and then kept going, his voice like stone. The community that sent the signal isn't part of our territorial holdings, but they're allies, farmers from what little we do know. Not much in the way of defenses. Marin's frown deepened, but she didn't speak until she was certain no one else would. Then, carefully and respectfully, "Sir, what did the message say, exactly? Do we have any sense of what we're walking into?" It was scratchy, IT admitted, his jaw flexing once as if he didn't like saying the words. Barely more than static even after the signals team cleaned it up. As best as we can tell, they reported an unprovoked attack, forces unknown. That's all we have. The deck lighting hummed as it shifted fully into cloak mode, the blue tones deepening until every shadow stretched long and soft around them. Marin felt her throat tighten and fought the image that wanted to rise. Tanagas on fire, another colony stripped bare by hands like vultures. She bowed her head a fraction, said a prayer under her breath, pleading with the lady that this wasn't Kurtzad, and held the words close where no one could hear them. IT's gaze cut across the formation, sharp enough to pin each of them where they stood. We'll be in system in under 2 hours. Until then, you'll revert all weapons to combat loadout, check every piece of kit you own, and prep for immediate ground action. Sergeant, I want you, Pillin, and Durza on the bridge for target evaluation when we make entry. Marin's head came up, her eyes wide before she schooled her face to something steadier. Me, sir? You've been hands-on in mission planning before, IT said, his tone flat, leaving no room for argument or modesty. It's a good time to learn evaluation under live conditions. There was no weight of favoritism in his words, no sideways glances from the others, just fact. Duty. Marin's chest loosened an inch. She squared her stance and lifted her chin. Understood, sir. A beat later, remembering what mattered most, she added. Sir, our rifles are still set for training. We'll need to return them to full function. Already accounted for, ITA replied. Make the time count. Any other questions? There were none. A few heads shook, low murmurs of no sir, filling the hangar. Then get to it. The formation broke, boots scattering over the steel. Marin bent to her rifle, her hands steady, not from lack of nerves, but from resolve settling like armor over her shoulders. This was no drill. Someone out there had begged the stars for help, and they had heard. She wouldn't fail them. She glanced once, just once, to where Greer stood as the others moved. His gaze was already on her, unreadable and steady. The kind of look that said he'd be right there, even in the dark, even if the sky caved in. She gave the barest nod before turning to strip her weapon, the weight of his quiet watchfulness grounding her more than any prayer could. Trying to keep an eye on the ad timers. Sorry. What's taken and what's left to save. Speaking of which, we have an ad starting in just under 5 minutes. What's taken and what's left to save. The bridge of Kier hummed with a quiet purpose, a low undercurrent of tension braided through every voice, every movement, every clipped command passed from one officer to another. It had been over an hour since the first alerts, an hour of systems checks and live fire confirmations of ensuring the gunship and shuttles were ready to launch the moment Reitman gave the word. The Marines had their armor prepped and their weapons slung. Marin stood just to the right of the holographic plot, one hand braced on its edge as if to ground herself, the other rolling the smooth stone Jared had given her between thumb and forefinger. A quiet wait, a reminder of something unbroken. She kept her eyes on the timer counting down to reversion, breath steady despite the knot in her chest. Perhaps later? Thank you, though. 10 seconds, the helmsman called, using his hands over the hyperdrive lever. The final countdown was almost a murmur beneath the hum of the bridge. Stars snapped back into stillness as real space unfolded around them. Instantly, Reitman's eyes went to the scanning station, his voice low and precise. 3 contacts spotted, Kuroda reported, his fingers tapping commands in quick succession. 3 blinking markers appeared on the hollow table display orbiting the colony world below. 2 Carrot-class cruisers, Kuroda continued, and 1 Starbolt-class assault carrier, line formation with the carrier in the middle. Old ships, Reitman muttered, his eyes narrowing. No IDs? Marin leaned in, squinting at the hazy sensor returns. Her voice was quiet, threaded with unease. Carrot class? Who even uses those anymore? She glanced at IT, seeking confirmation. Kuroda only shook his head. There's no IFF. Engine traces will tell us more once we close in. IT's tone was measured, matter of fact. Anyone could fly them. Designs like that date back to the Clone Wars, but with a carrier present, I assume they've got troops on the ground. Is there any way to confirm? Reitman looked at Kuroda, who answered with a tight shake of his head. Not from this distance. We're running passives only. Marin shifted her weight, her eyes fixed on the repeating plot. Sensor drones? If we have one, it could get close without risking the rest of the ship. If we launch now, maybe, Kuroda admitted. But if they catch it, they'll know the colony's call for help got through. Better to keep them blind, Travers countered, leaning over the plot with a grim set to his jaw. We go quiet. They never know we're here until it's too late. Marin bit her lip, thinking. The drone can't cloak? It has shields, Kuroda replied with a shrug. The odds are 50-50. It depends on how sharp their sensor tech is. Reitman didn't waste any time. Put us into high orbit of the next planet. Launch the drone from there at low velocity. Passives and visual scans only. Relay every 30 seconds, then burn it into Atmo out of their sightline. Aye, sir. The plan made Marin's mouth twitch into the faintest grin, even under the tension. That's precisely what she would have done. Think it'll pick up anything on the surface? If they've got troops down there, we'll see the orbital link, Reitman answered. Minutes crawled by until fresh telemetry flickered across the holotable, revealing more ships hiding over the poles out of long-range scan paths. Clever, experienced, this wasn't a ragged band of raiders, not with those maneuvers. What could they possibly want from the colony? Marin asked softly, studying the signatures. Supplies? Anything they can carry, Travers growled. He jabbed a finger at a heavier return in the northern formation. That one's a personnel carrier. I'd wager a month's pay it's slave transport. They'll strip the settlement and take every soul they can haul for the trade. The words hit Marin like a physical blow. She froze, her breath sharp in her throat. Bastine surged back unbidden, the cold stink of oil and blood. Boots on durasteel, her hands twitched, fingers curling tight against her palm before she forced them still. IT's eyes flicked to her, catching the tremor before she schooled her features, before the mask of focus slid back into place. He said nothing, but his jaw tightened, a quiet understanding passing between the seasoned Marine and the too young survivor. And I'm going to pause right there because we're about to be in an ad, my friends. I will see you in a minute and a half. Go get yourself a drink of water. There we go. All right, my friends, we are back from our ad break. I hope you had a chance to get yourself a drink of water or a snack. I did just that. All this reading is making me thirsty. Shuttle activity launching from the carrier. Kuroda cut in sharply. Multiple craft inbound to the surface. The drone's almost at the end of its run. Ahead 2/3, Reitman ordered. Battle stations. The bridge erupted in controlled motion, klaxons warbling low as the crew moved with practiced efficiency. Marin lingered only a heartbeat longer, her gaze locked on the slave transport icon, and then turned for the corridor beyond the bridge. Her stride lengthened toward the hangars, armor and kit already in her mind. Behind her, IT asked quietly, "What's your plan, Captain?" Reitman's reply was steel. "We cripple that carrier first, then the fighter ship. The cruisers can't haul shuttles, they'll have no choice but to run or burn." "You could make them torch the colony," IT warned quietly. "Not while Kerr is still flying," Reitman replied. Marin caught the last words where the hatch sealed behind her. For now, she had one thought in mind. Get ready. There were people down there, and she remembered too well what happened when no one came fast enough. Threading the needle. The hum of engines thrummed low through the Durasteel deck, a constant vibration that barely masked the taut silence hanging over the hangar bay. Marin sat on the edge of a gear crate, her kit laid out with the precision of someone who couldn't afford mistakes. Straps were tightened, clasps were checked, every buckle cinched down like armor against the weight pressing between her ribs. The low murmur of Marines filled the hangar, but their words blurred into background noise, steady, quiet, and professional. She had her head down, her hands working because it kept her from thinking too far ahead. From the sergeant's voice cut across the commnet, sharp and clipped. "Durza, bridge, on the double." It jolted like a rifle shot in the dark. Her gaze snapped up, her eyes meeting his for half a heartbeat. He just shrugged, hooked a thumb toward the lift. Urgent. There was no time for questions. No time for hesitation. She beat the inside of her lip hard enough to taste copper and bolted, boots hammering on the deck as she ran flat out for the lift. Across the bay, leaning against the wing strut of the gunship, Greer didn't move. Didn't look after her either, but his jaw shifted, teeth whirring at the edge of his tongue, a Marine's tell that he'd noticed every step of her leaving. He didn't have to follow to know why she'd been called. Too much history between them for guesswork. Too many missions where she'd been pulled out of the line of fire for something no one else could do. He just kept one gloved hand resting on the receiver of his carbine, his posture loose, his eyes half-lidded like he was staring through the deck plating and counting breaths that weren't his own. The bridge was colder than the shuttle bay, tension layered over the hum of consoles and low-voiced orders. Marin stepped out of the lift 2 minutes later, breath only just, calm, a sheen of effort still clinging to her skin. She smoothed her fatigues absently, a pointless reflex that made her feel less like she'd sprinted blindly into a storm. "Rushed?" IT asked, a dry edge under his tone as he motioned her over towards the plotting table. The schematic of the Carrot class hovered there in bright lines, its aft section magnified until every conduit could be counted. It was so close she could almost count the bolts. She gave a slight nod, stepping up beside him, her gaze flicking briefly toward the Captain Reitman. "What's going on?" The question was soft, almost a whisper, but it carried weight nonetheless. Reitman didn't waste time. "Carrier's about to hit atmosphere. We can't risk active propulsion on a torpedo without lighting up every radar sensor within 100 clicks. But..." He held her gaze for a moment, his meaning clear without words. Marin's lips tightened, a grim line of understanding setting in. "A drift's too slow unless someone guides it." She bit at her lower lip, not from nerves, but from the sharp edge of calculation cutting through her head. "I've done something close before. Nothing quite like this." A pause. She breathed shallow, and then she gave a decisive nod. "I'll try, but we'd better pray the lady's listening." Reitman's finger tapped a section of the Carrick's aft hull. "Here." Hit that relay cluster, make it look like they blew their own mains. No power, no emissions. We're setting position so you only need to throw it straight down. She swallowed, her pulse hammering in her throat, and asked quietly, "Which tube?" "One. Loaded, sealed, and standing by," Kuroda confirmed. Marin closed her eyes briefly, calling up the cure's layout in her mind, mapping herself to the steel bones of the ship. A breath out, slow and controlled, and she reached for the faintest energy signature of the live warhead. It was bright as a distant heartbeat in the darkness. The helm officer's voice cut across the bridge. "In position." "Ready?" Reitman asked, turning towards her. Marin slipped a hand into her pocket, her fingers finding the smooth stone Jared had given her. A grounding weight. Now a tether. "Ready, sir," she answered, her voice steadier than she actually felt. The order came quickly, sharply. "Fire!" There was a soft hiss through the hull as the torpedo loosed into the black. Marin lifted her hand a fraction, orienting herself to where the target lurked below. Her mind closed around the drifting torpedo, phantom fingers grasping it, pushing, nudging, willing it to cut the path she drew in her mind. Sweat traced a line down her temple as she held it steady against the pull of the void. The shuttle bay, the chatter, even Cure itself, all of it fell away until it was just her, the torpedo, and the shape of the ship she had to kill without anyone knowing she'd been there. Minutes dragged like hours. With one last shove, hard and sure, she let it go. "Direct hit," Tactical confirmed, the quiet words slicing through the tension. On the main screen, a dull bloom flared exactly where she'd aimed. Kuroda called out, "Main power's gone. Aux only. She's bleeding altitude. She won't make a clean re-entry at that angle. The other raiders are closing, running active scans." "Get us clear," Reitman snapped. Cure surged as the helmet burned hard, carving an invisible path through the hostile formation. Marin sat back against the edge of the plotting table, her pulse still racing, breath hissing in and out of her lungs. That had taken everything she had. Moments later, a Carrot-class cruiser swept past their vector like a Durasteel mountain. Too close. Too fast. Cure bucked hard as they dove, their inertial compensators lagging half a second behind. Marin clung to the console, her jaw clenched, feeling the ghostly whisper of proximity like a knife's edge brushing skin. "Too close," Reitman muttered grimly. "Helm, port rudder 30 degrees. Keep us tucked under their blind side." He studied the plot, his jaw tightening as the raiders swarmed the failing troopship. "They want her down bad, which means this is our window." Marin's frown deepened, but there was no hesitation in her voice. "Then we take it, sir." Orbital insertion. The hangar roared to life in a sudden rush of motion, Marines clattering past with packs slung low, tech crews hauling crates to waiting shuttles, the heavy whine of repulsors spooling for pre-flight. The urgency in the air was palpable, but not panicked, with drilled discipline keeping every movement sharp and precise. Even in the chaos, the old habits of soldiers under fire held strong. Marin moved through it like a ghost threading the edge of a storm. Pack settled tight, her rifle slung, her eyes scanning without giving anything away. She caught the briefest flicker of a glance from Greer across the bay, a fraction of a second only, but she read it all the same. He'd seen her bolt from the hangar minutes before, and he'd known why. Now he was angling his course without seeming to, closing the distance one step at a time until he was moving in along IT's shuttle crew. Not a word passed between them. No hand signal, no nod, not even the weight of a look exchanged. But when Marin stepped up to the open ramp of the lead shuttle, Greer was already there, checking his harness straps with the casual focus of a veteran used to boarding under fire. "Move it, Marines!" IT barked, his voice carrying over the rising howl of the engines. "This window doesn't wait for anyone." Marin swallowed hard and followed the others aboard, her boots clanging on the deck plate. She slid into a jump seat, tugging on restraints and double-checking her gear, every motion practiced and deliberate. Across the cramped compartment, Greer settled in opposite her, his rifle resting easily against his leg. If anyone noticed his presence here instead of on another bird, no one called it out. It was just one more old hand filling a seat where he was needed. But Marin knew better. She felt it. A quiet wall at her back, the kind that didn't need the force to make itself known. Greer wouldn't say a thing. He didn't need to. He'd watched her run to the bridge, watched her come back carrying more weight than when she left. Whatever was waiting on the ground, he wasn't about to leave her facing it alone. The hatch slammed shut with a hydraulic hiss, cutting off the roar of the hangar beyond. Lights dimmed to red combat glow, and the shuttle bucked as thrusters engaged, throwing every stomach in the compartment toward their boots. Greer caught her gaze just long enough for a single silent message to settle between them. Whatever comes next, kid, you're not carrying it by yourself. The thought steadied her hands on the buckle straps as the shuttle dove toward the planet below. Silent descent. The shuttle's cabin was dim, stripped of anything unnecessary that could give away heat or light on approach. Its hull groaned softly under the pressure of re-entry, a low thrumming that traveled through the deck plates and up Marin's boots, a steady counterpoint to the irregular rhythm of her pulse. She sat strapped into the seat near the rear bulkhead, her helmet balanced on her knees, gloved fingers flexing once, twice before curling tight around the cold durasteel rim. Welcome in, Evelyn Clark. Evelyn Clark, thank you for the follow. I appreciate you. My name is Meshla. I am primarily an audiobook streamer. I write and read my own Star Wars fanfiction. I've been writing Star Wars fanfiction for, oh my goodness, 25 years. So welcome into the stream. I hope you enjoy the story. This evening we're continuing reading my story called Steps into the Past, chapter 4 to 6. We are currently nearing the end of chapter 4. It wasn't fear. Not entirely. She knew fear. She had tasted it often enough to tell its weight and color. This was something else, like a blade's edge glinting just at the corner of her mind. Waiting. Watching. She had reached for the Force 3 times now, each attempt met with that same elusive sense of wrongness. There, but blurred, like a whisper through smoke. Each time she pulled back before it could sharpen into clarity, swallowing down the old instinct to dig deeper, to know, to fight. She couldn't risk it. Not here. Not now. Every lesson drilled into her at the Praxium, every word Ethan had barked across the clearing told her the same thing. You make yourself a shadow when you must. She drew her presence in tight, folding it around herself like armor, burying the flare of her emotions under layers of practiced control. Small, silent, and invisible. It helped a little, but only a little. Across the narrow aisle, Greer's gaze lingered on her longer than regulation required. He hadn't said a word since they'd launched. He hadn't needed to. He was all marine, set like iron in his own seat, his helmet already sealed, a rifle across his lap. But the weight of his gaze was unmistakable. A subtle flick of 2IT on the far side of the compartment said he'd seen it too. The tension in Marin's shoulders, the taut grip on her helmet, the breath she held just a moment too long before forcing it out. They didn't speak. Veil protocol was a living thing here, unbroken even between them. But a Marine's battlefield read didn't need words. Greer's nod to IT was enough to say, "She's on edge. Stay close when we drop." Marin wasn't paying attention to them anymore. The hum of the engines, the shuffle of armor plates as Marines shifted in their seats, all of it faded to the background as something else brushed against her. Not through the Force, not in the way Jedi teachings defined it, but deeper, older, a memory so strong that it carried weight, settling over her like the warmth of a heavy cloak, like the solidity of arms she knew by heart closing around her shoulders from behind. Jarius. Her chest ached sharply, and for a moment her breath caught, her eyes squeezing shut hard against the sting that rose unbidden. She swore no one saw it. He didn't speak at first. He didn't need to. The phantom of him was enough, the smell of blaster oil and old leather. The rasp of his laugh when she'd slipped on the Tracinia's deck plating, the way his hands had steadied her more times than she could count. It felt real now in this cold, quiet shuttle, his presence wrapping around her, unshaken and unafraid. And then, low and rough as if carried from a long way off, came his voice. Steady now, Marika. Feel the deck under you. Hear your heartbeat. Fear's noise. Nothing more. Breathe with me. She did. In. Out. Slowly. The tremble left her hands, replaced by a hard, tight steadiness that settled in her gut. Her father's ghost didn't promise safety. It never had. But he gave her back her footing. Even here, even now, when the dark below Collier felt like it was holding its breath just for her. By the time the shuttle banked for its final approach, Marin had her helmet on, her head turned just enough to meet Greer's gaze through the dim light. She gave him the slightest nod, a promise she could hold her line. Greer's return nod was even smaller, but said, "Good. I've got you anyway." And that is the end of chapter 4, my friends. I'm going to take a moment to get myself a drink of water, and then we're going to pick up with chapter 5. And actually, we're doing pretty well. That took about an hour, so that's actually pretty good timing. Actually, one sec. Before I move on to chapter 5, I wanted to read something to you guys that's actually at the end of chapter 4, and it's actually the end of every chapter of the story. You may have noticed that there's something called Veil Doctrine. Veil Doctrine is something that I created for my stories. It's protocol and doctrine designed to protect and for people to move in secret. A little bit of explanation for those. Veil Doctrine, these are all maxims that I'm using. These are things that I wrote. There are things that are not recited in formations. They are passed in low voices between patrols, signed wordlessly across a room, or left unspoken but understood in a single glance. They belong to the Katani Marines, veil-cleared operatives, and those Katani Jedi who operate in places the galaxy must never know existed. The doctrine does not glorify secrecy. It acknowledges the cost, the weight of unseen choices, missions without acknowledgement, names erased to keep others safe. Those who serve under veil learn that silence can protect as surely as armor, and that some sacrifices must remain unmarked for the galaxy to remain whole. They are not rules, they are reminders of duty, of consequence, and of the quiet price of keeping watch where others dare not look. Which actually leads right into the one for chapter 4, oddly enough. So the fail maxim, okay, so let's see. We keep watch where others dare not look. Veil Doctrine, Oro Maxim 4. Others face the enemy they can see. We face the shadows. What moves before a shot is fired, what stirs in the space between breaths. Vigilance in the veil is not glory. It is choosing to stand sentry in places where fear keeps others blind. Welcome in, Robert. Good to see you this evening. Give me just a moment, guys. I will be right back. I just... Well, welcome back from that ad break, my friends. I appreciate you hanging out through that. I had enough time to catch my breath and get some more water in a sec. Let's get back to it. Alright. Just trying to remember where it was at. Oh, man. Alright. Okay. Landing zone Theta. The gunship swept the tree line again, low and deliberate, the repulsor snarling softly against the night air as it made another pass. Dust and loose leaves billowed upward in its wake, settling only when the second sweep confirmed what they already hoped. The zone was quiet. Clear enough. The shuttles came in tight and disciplined, their twin engines barely louder than a breath against the vastness of Collier's dark plains. They had no stealth fields to conceal them, only the night, the silence, and the hope that the torpedo strike Marin had ordered hours ago had thrown enough chaos into the raiders' ranks to blind them. As soon as the landing struts kissed dirt, the Marines moved like water through rock channels, fluid, certain, each piece knowing its place. The perimeter formed, rifles low but ready, eyes and scopes scanning in every direction as if the air itself might spit fire at them. IT was the last to step off the shuttle, microburst transmitter in hand, already signaling cure. The faint static hum underlined his even voice. "Ground secure," he said. Tone clipped but steady. Theta established, moving to position. He listened to the response, gave a short nod, and cut the channel. Turning slightly, his voice softened. "Not much, but enough. Looks like your torpedo run did its job," he said, catching Marin's gaze as the last faint red light of the transmitter died in his palm. "They're too busy keeping their carrier from falling out of the sky to notice we're here." It drew a slight grin from her, quick and fleeting, but real. "I was hoping it would, sir," she murmured, already rising to her feet, adjusting her rifle strap with a smooth pull. "With luck, it'll keep their eyes on the wreckage long enough for us to work." She fell in at the rear of the group, closing gaps without thought, breathing the rhythm of silent movements. The hills ahead were patchwork shadows, brushed with wild trees and jagged rock, offering a hunter's cover if you knew how to move through it. IT had chosen well. They slipped forward, ghosting through dark and brush, boots whispering over dry earth until they found a good vantage point. He was the first into a crouch behind the ridge. His macro binoculars lifted, scanning over the scattered settlement lights below. A recon team was already threading its way closer, and their breathing over the secure line was as much confirmation as words. Marin sank down beside him, her body folding low, still, but her mind reached outward with slow care. The air here held fear, thick and cloying, rolling in waves from the huddled colonists below. It pressed on her lungs, turned her stomach, and threatened to drag her under. She forced herself to keep her breathing even, to keep her presence veiled, muted, nearly invisible. She whispered locations softly, each word a measured offering to IT as her senses stretched just far enough to mark shadows for men in the line. The column crackled softly. 6. This is point. Bell tower, east corner of the square. I've got a good sightline. IT's reply was dry and matter-of-fact. Point, this is 6. Copy your position. Hold and report. Marin stayed quiet, listening, mapping every detail passed between them and feeding what the force whispered in return. A patrol here, a shift in fear there, movements that had no place in a night so still. For every breath she drew, her chest ached with that elusive weight. Something more than this. Something waiting just past the horizon of knowledge. A flicker of presence brushed her shoulders, faint but anchoring like arms once familiar in a life she still couldn't let herself remember too often. Jarius. Not sight, nor sound, just weight, warmth, a tether that pulled her back from spinning out into panic. It steadied her hands where they might have trembled. And yet, under that weight, unease pooled deeply. The brush around them was silent in a way that wasn't natural, a hunted kind of quiet, thick with the wrong sort of intent. She kept her breathing steady, her force presence locked down tight, knowing instinctively that to shine too bright would be to draw eyes she could not afford. They would move soon. IT was waiting for the recon team's final word, and when they did, she knew whatever waited in that village would not be the simple raid it looked like from above. Something more coiled there, waiting to strike. Give me just a moment. Okay. The shadow in their midst. The night had teeth here. Not the kind that snapped or tore, but the kind that bit, slow, a creeping pressure along the spine that whispered that you weren't alone, that the dark was watching back. It settled over the ridge where they crouched, eyes on the colony, the only sounds the faint static of encrypted columns and the soft shifting of boots against dry brush. Sorry. There we go. IT was steady as stone, one knee braced, his macro binoculars up, every movement deliberate. Marin crouched just below him, still, focused, her eyes narrowed as she breathed past the storm of fear spilling from the settlement below. She spoke quiet coordinates, a low thread of words only IT and Greer nearby could catch, and then fell silent, keeping herself veiled and small in the force. Greer felt it in his gut before the calm even clicked. The kind of tension that wasn't just nerves before a strike. It was older, sharper, the kind that said there was a snare ahead and they hadn't found all the wires yet. He shifted his stance just enough to lean on his good knee. As slow as drifting shadow, closing the distance between himself and Marin without making it a thing anyone would notice. A hand brushed down to adjust the sling on his rifle, nothing more, but his eyes cut to her once, tracking the tightness in her shoulders. Something had her on edge, and it wasn't just the civilian's fear bleeding into the air. The recon report started calm and clinically enough. Patrols were marked, hostages located, the enemy numbers climbing past 30. Nothing they hadn't seen before. But then a voice over the calm, low and strained. 6. Sending image now. Got a mark on their right pauldron. You'll want to see this. IT's datapad blinked once, the image loading slowly. Marin leaned in before she even thought about it. The patch hit her like a gut punch. A sharply cut mythosaur sigil, the lines jagged and wrong. Garrett sobbed. Death Watch. The word rolled in her head like old fire and blood, and when it slipped out under her breath, it was in Mandoa, a curse honed on grief and memory she'd never escaped. Greer caught the sound and the flash of anger that tightened her posture, her fists curling. His gaze swept instantly outward, through the squad, the way an old predator scents for another in the brush. His instinct screamed wrong, and it wasn't just the sigil. It was the faint tick in Halloran's jaw as he looked anywhere but at Marin or T. The almost imperceptible slow exhale from Dance, his head tilting just slightly, like a man adjusting for information he already knew would come. They didn't flinch at the announcement, didn't swear or spit like the others. They were just quiet, measured, and watching. Greer didn't move much closer. Protocol and discipline stopped him, but his weight shifted a hair toward Marin, enough to let her know someone had her flank. His rifle sat easy in his hands, but his eyes were all calculation now. Flicking from Halloran to Dance, to Marin, and back again. Something in the rhythm of it all was offbeat like a song with a note that didn't belong. Halloran's face stayed schooled, but his boots scuffed the dirt twice in quick succession, restless energy that didn't fit a Marine settling into Overwatch before a strike. Dance barely breathed wrong, but his silence wasn't the same kind as Greer's or IT's. It was coiled, almost expectant, a long game in action, the strings pulled where no one else could see them. Death Watch, Marin whispered again, lower now, her voice iron scraped over transparent steel. This isn't a raid. Her tone was steady, but under the words was a weight Greer recognized. The kind you only carried after seeing Deathwatch close enough to remember their faces in your sleep. IT's orders crackled low across the comnet, steady and unflinching, already adjusting tactics, but Greer kept one part of his mind tuned to Marin's quiet tension, another to the strange stillness of two men who should have reacted stronger than they did. Something was wrong in the fire team, something deeper than the enemy ahead, but this wasn't the place to drag it out. Not yet. Greer settled his boot in the dust slowly and deliberately, letting the sound be just loud enough for Marin to hear behind her. A quiet signal. You're not alone. And still, in the dark, the wrongness lingered, a phantom heartbeat waiting to break the silence in ways none of them were ready for. Oh goodness. I need water. Signals in the quiet. The night settled like a slow, heavy blanket over the ridge, the kind that swallowed breath and thought alike, where every shift of boot leather or rasp of gear against rough stone felt like a flare tossed into silence. Marines moved in the low, disciplined scatter among scrub and stunted trees, their presence marked only by the occasional glint of visor transparisteel or the muted click of a blaster safety being checked again. Beyond, the village lights glowed faintly, a fragile island under siege. Even at this range, the muted terror of the colonists pulsed against Marin's senses like a dull, unceasing drumbeat. She kept her presence locked down tight, a wall raised against the tide because letting it spill over now would mean drowning in fear that wasn't hers, but weighed across her chest like it could have been. Captain IT's form was a dark silhouette hunched over the topographical display on his vambrace, the filtered glow casting hard lines across a face set in grim calculation. His hands moved in short, sharp motions, dispatching fire teams with a precision that spoke of long years, breathing the same stale air before a fight. 30-plus tangos, Deathwatch trained, with hostages penned up like currency to be spent. This wasn't a clean strike. This was a knife fight in a locked room, and they all knew it. IT finished his last hand signal, watching the team slip it into the shadows of the arroyo below before turning his attention up the ridge. He breathed deeply, cast a glance toward the dark sky where stars pricked the void, and then a flick of his fingers had his comm officer tugging a veil-band unit free of his kit. This goes to Cure, top priority, IT said quietly, his voice flat with the weight of command decisions carved in iron. He thumbed his encoded tag and watched the green pulse of the microburst confirm connection. Situation updated. 30 plus Death Watch signatures confirmed village occupation. The hostages are alive. Assault to commence on my mark. Have Cure maintain overwatch. Batteries hot. Expect resistance heavier than initial recon. The reply back was clipped, a whisper across the encrypted static. Copy, ITE. Relay acknowledged. Cure standing by. For a moment, IT's eyes lingered on the comm unit, the ghost of a frown tugging at his mouth before he locked it away. The ship in orbit was their knife edge, but it was also a tether to something bigger, something that could go wrong fast if what his gut told him was true. The comm officer slid the unit back into his pouch and before IT angled towards Marin, boots finding quiet purchase on rock and dirt. Wait 1 second. She crouched in shadow, her knees drawn in, one hand curled around a glint of metal that caught starlight. A chain threaded through restless fingers, tags worn smooth with memory. Her gaze was pinned on the settlement rooftops like she could will them into safety if she only stared hard enough. Anything you're picking up that our eyes and scanners wouldn't? His tone was low and deliberate, pitched to carry only as far as her ears. She took the canteen from him without looking away, sipping slowly and then let the breath out between her teeth. The colonist, she murmured. Voice thin but steady, like saying it louder might snap a thread inside her chest. I can feel where they are. I can feel how scared they are. But anything else? She rubbed her temple with the back of her thumb, the tags turning in her other hand. If there's another Force user, I can't pinpoint them. Deathwatch used to run with them sometimes. There could be one here. Adds another layer of hell, IT muttered, scanning the map display again, his mind shifting pieces on a board that kept rewriting itself. Marin's eyes were dark, but they met his now. Resolve set like stone. If there is one, I'll handle it. Then I'll help with the rest. They won't touch the colonists. He gave a short nod, without any wasted words. There was no pretense between them. He turned the display to her, his finger tracing the curves of land ahead where the shadows pooled thick. The teams are spreading. Entry here. Tight cover until the line. You're with me. The gunship's warm. The shuttle's on the wire for evac. She followed the line of approach, the rhythm of it, and nodded once. It was practical, solid, still dangerous as Daryaim. Her hand ghosted to her belt, feeling the weight of her saber snug in its makeshift holster. A silent promise to herself. Once we're inside, we won't ghost them all, quiet, IT said, his mouth tightening. Priority still the hostages. We cut down the guards first, fast and clean. Understood, she answered softly, holding his gaze a breath longer before dropping it back to the dirt, bracing against the weight of what was coming. If you need me ahead, I can move quietly. She didn't elaborate. I might call on it. His nod ended the exchange, the plan sealed in silence. Greer slipped closer, a shadow heavier than the night, his boots settling like an old predator staking ground near kin. He said nothing. He didn't need to, but Marin felt his presence settle just behind her shoulder. His instincts were gnawing at him, the same ones that had kept him alive in fights that should have buried him. Something in this op was wrong, had been wrong since the first Deathwatch insignia flashed on IT's data feed. Halloran's jaw was too tight. Dance was too still. Not marine still, but something colder, like a man counting seconds toward a mark only he knew. Greer didn't know what the pieces meant yet, but he knew enough to shift closer, his rifle held low and ready, body a quiet barrier beside Marin. The promise wasn't spoken, but it didn't need to be. I see it. I'm here. IT rose from his crouch, His hand signal low and sharp, and the line of Marines moved, shadow breaking off the ridge and sliding into the folds of the earth below. Each step forward carried the same taut weight, a wire stretched between what they knew and what was moving unseen beneath the surface, waiting for the strike they couldn't yet name. Hence the title of the stream. The long crawl. The descent into the first cut of the earth was a quiet kind of hell, the kind that made every breath feel like it had weight, that stretched each step into something deliberate and sharp-edged. The arroyo carved its way through the dry soil, shallow and narrow enough that every Marine moved hunched, gear close to their bodies, rifles cradled low. The moon's pale light barely touched here, just a smear of silver against the high lip of the ravine, the kind of darkness that was more sensed than seen. Marin's boots made no more sound than falling dust. She stayed 2 steps behind IT, just where he'd told her to be, her posture folded small to blend with the rest of them. Even here, even crawling toward a nest of Deathwatch, she kept her presence locked tight in the Force, as if she could disappear altogether if she pulled it close enough. It took effort not to reach out, not to let herself drown in the swirl of fear from the hostages or the predatory readiness of the men ahead. Her focus became the narrow track of dirt, the measured rhythm of her breath, the weight of the saber held steady at her belt. IT moved with the confidence of a man who had done this more times than he cared to count. Every shift of his frame calculated to make the least noise, every pause a wordless hand signal that rippled down the line. He carried command like a second skin, quiet but undeniable, his eyes flicking back enough just to mark his people, to mark her, to ensure no one broke the fragile chain of silence between them. Greer brought up the rear of their section, his presence a dark, quiet anchor. Years of combat had carved something feral into him, a hunter's instinct tuned to the small wrong things, and things were wrong tonight. He felt it in the cadence of footsteps that weren't quite in rhythm, in the fractional delay of Halloran's response to a hand signal, in the way that Dance moved like a man who wasn't adjusting to terrain so much as cataloging it, mapping out options for later plays only he knew the rules to. It wasn't blatant. Halloran kept his face neutral, his rifle exactly where it should be, but the tension in his jaw wasn't battle readiness. It was anticipation, like a predator waiting for someone else to spring the trap. Greer had seen that look before on men whose loyalties were buried under layers of rot. It made the skin between his shoulders itch. Dance was worse. He didn't project malice, didn't telegraph a thing, but that stillness, the way his eyes didn't stop moving even when his body did, the faint curl of his lip when the plan shifted. It wasn't Marine discipline, it was patience, old and cold, something bred for infiltration, for long games that ended in blood. If Halloran looked like he was waiting for a strike, Dance looked like he was building one, brick by brick, breath by breath. Greer didn't break stride. He didn't even change his pace, but his position shifted forward a fraction, closing the gap toward Marin. One step sooner to put himself between her and anything that turned. One step sooner to bring a rifle up if instincts proved right. His breath stayed even, calm on the surface, but inside the old alarms were sounding, low and insistent. He kept his head down, helmet angled forward, his eyes on the dirt and the man in front of him. But his mind ticked through contingencies, muscle memory already mapping angles, choke points where he'd put a round if the op went sideways from the inside the line. IT's head lifted slightly as they neared the last bend before the settlement perimeter, one gloved fist going up slowly and steadily. The line froze, crouching low against the walls of earth, rifles angled toward the blind corner ahead. IT didn't look back, but Greer saw the way his free hand flexed once at his side. Tension kept on a leash. He felt it too. Something about the air in this arroyo had teeth. We have an ad starting in just under 5 minutes, my friends. Marin's breath was barely audible, but she felt it, a jagged thread of wrongness humming under the surface of the squad, woven not from from the death watch ahead, but from someone too close behind. She didn't let herself look, didn't give away that she felt it. Her grip tightened on the chain of tags still threaded between her fingers inside the pocket of her utilities. She anchored herself to the memory of the man who had once worn them, to the kind of certainty she needed to carry forward in silence. IT held the pause just long enough to test the night, to count heartbeats and feel the squad settle before lowering his fist. A small signal, a finger sweep, and they moved again. Silent shadows pressed low to the earth, every step dragging the wire tighter between suspicion and the job they had come here to do. Because the hostages were ahead. They were scared and waiting for rescue, and whatever ghosts were moving inside their own line, they would deal with after, if they lived that long. The line drawn in shadow. The arroyo spat them out into a narrow swale, where the land flattened beneath the spindly reach of half-dead trees and clumps of brittle brush. Beyond that, the faint glow of the sediment pulsed against the low clouds, a dull orange halo over rooftops and low fence lines. The night air smelled of dust and oil, acrid with the tang of burning fuel drifting on the breeze. Somewhere inside the village, a child whimpered and was hushed quickly. That soft, broken sound threading sharply through the quiet until it disappears. Hello, Foxy. Welcome in. Hello, how are you? I am about halfway through chapter 5? Yes, chapter 5. I can't keep track of where I am. This is pretty bad. It's been one of those days. It's fine. I was at the end of a paragraph. Thank you. I appreciate the hug. Much appreciated. Yeah, it's been a kind of crazy day. And I started stream up by not putting the proper title on, so that was fun. Anyway, it's there now. Yes, do the— oh, okay. No, I think I have enough time to do that. Okay, so our vocabulary word for the day is... It wasn't the category, it was the stream title. I forgot to change it from Sunday. Oops. So, our vocabulary word for the day is a word that actually came up earlier in the chapter. It's Daryaim. D-A-R'_Y-A-I-M. It's the Mandoa word for hell. You're welcome. That is our vocabulary word for the day. Oh boy. Yeah, about that. We have an ad starting in just under a minute, so I'm gonna read going to read probably one more paragraph and then stop. No, it's fine. IT's fist came up again, stopping the column as naturally as breathing. He crouched low, one knee in the dirt, the map display on his wrist ghosting with light from its filter display. His eyes traced the final approach routes, angles of fire, positions of possible cover, his mind reading the terrain like a code only he and a handful of old wolves had survived long enough to understand. His jaw flexed, unspoken calculation under the weight of 30-plus tangos armed and eager to die for Deathwatch. Too many variables, too little margin. And I'm going to stop there because we're about to have an ad in about 7 seconds. So, I will see you guys back in a minute and a half. Please go get yourselves a snack or some water. Have a stretch. I will see you back in a minute and a half. Alright, my friends. Welcome back from the ad break. Hope you took the advantage of the time to go get a snack or a drink or a stretch like I just did. Um, and as always, please feel free to play with the toys in the channel. I have channel points for various redeems, most of which are self-care, or in Foxy's case, vocabulary. I do like to talk about vocabulary. Some of it is Mandoa, which is actually a language created by Karen Travis, which I have since added words of my own to on occasion. I do try to translate them when I can. I'm also in the process of creating a language called Atashir for the Katani people, which are a creation by a fellow writer of mine when I was writing cooperatively. And I've actually taken the culture and expanded on it quite a bit since then, with the language being one of those expansions. It's still in progress, but always working on it, as a lore gremlin does. Anyway, so yes, please feel free to play with the channel points and all of the other silliness. Please and thank you. Alright. Okay. Righty. Oops. Okay. Marin settled next to him, small and still, her helmet angled toward the ground. Her forced presence was a banked coal, held close, only a small tendril reaching outward toward the village. Fear rolled off of them in soft waves, raw and aching, tangled in the despair of people who knew Deathwatch could decide they weren't worth keeping alive. She didn't push further, didn't dare sweep too wide. Even here, someone might feel the wrong kind of ripple. It might give them away. Greer dropped to one knee, a meter off IT's left flank, rifle angled toward the rooftops, his breath steady as he scanned for movement. A part of his attention wasn't on the perimeter ahead. It was behind, ghosting over the men they'd brought down this path. Halloran knelt 2 spots back, his face hidden beneath his helmet, his posture perfect, but his hands on his rifle were just a fraction too tight. Too ready. Not tension from fear or focus. No, this was different. Greer had seen men like that on recon runs that went to hell because someone fed the enemy their position. The kind of tension that came not from waiting on orders, but from knowing something you shouldn't. Dance crouched on the opposite flank, silent, an observer even among his own. His gaze swept the perimeter, but there was a watchfulness in it that had nothing to do with keeping hostiles off the line. Every so often his helmet tilted just enough towards Marin's position. A flicker, almost nothing, but to Greer it was a tell, not interest. Assessment. Like a hunter measuring distance, patience, set like iron in his stance. IT had seen it too, though he didn't turn his head. The flicker of his eyes toward Halloran's posture, a fractional delay before Dance acknowledged the last hand signal. It had settled in his mind like grit beneath armor. But there were hostages in there, and the command decisions had to be weighed against priorities. If he called it now, broke trust in the line, it could fracture everything they had built to reach this point. So he logged it, violent under quiet watch, every instinct sharp and unsettled. 2 squads on the north wall, IT murmured low over the tight beam calm, his tone even, clipped, nothing in it to betray his unease. 3 to the southern entry. My team holds east, breach on my mark. The gunship is standing by. The replies came softly, affirmed by men who trusted him without question. The trust was a weight he carried, heavy and deliberate. Marin kept her head down, her eyes on the dirt, but her gut twisted with something she didn't have words for. The fear from the colonists was a constant ache, but under it, nearer to her own squad, something else burned quieter. Not a force signature exactly, not danger. More like a tension in the air, a wire drawn tight across their path. She'd learned long ago not to ignore feelings like that. She tucked it away, her heart thudding slow and heavy, fingers ghosting over the tags in her pocket like a prayer unspoken. Greer shifted his stance fractionally closer to her flank, his boots silent, his rifle sweeping in low, slow arcs. If something went wrong from inside their own line, he meant to be the wall between her and it. IT glanced down the line once, just a flicker, and then back to the settlement glow beyond. On me, he breathed into the comm. The column rippled forward again, shadow to shadow, 31 meters stretching thinner with every step. The plan was set, the pieces moving, and whatever ghosts were walking in their own formation, they'd have to keep masks in place until blood or betrayal brought the truth to light. Because tonight, the only thing that mattered was getting those people out alive, and both Greer and IT knew that whatever was wrong in their own ranks would not stay buried forever. I don't know about you guys, but this is getting kind of intense. So, yeah. Oh. The quiet knife. The air near the perimeter had a different weight to it, a sort of brittle stillness that clung to the dirt and fences like frost, even though the night was warm. Every breath carried the acrid tang of smoke and old fuel. Every shift of boot leather over grit felt louder than it had any right to. The Marines moved with a kind of deliberate silence that came only from long years of training, their discipline cutting the night into measured pieces. They'd been here long enough to know where the enemy's attention frayed, where sentries leaned on routine instead of vigilance, and yet, for all that advantage, there was no easing of tension in the line. Every one of them knew how quickly things went to hell in a Death Watch stronghold, how fast a single slip could cost hostages their lives. IT signaled the column to ground, low and tight against the earth's broken lip where the scrub gave way to the faint glow of a village gate. The captain's frame was a study in calm predation, balanced crouch. Map display dark, every movement precise and patient. Oops. Sorry. He didn't speak, just passed hand signals down the line, fragmenting the squad into kill pairs, each shadow peeling away to the angles they'd drilled. Greer knelt 2 steps behind Marin, his body low, his weight forward, every sense alive to the terrain and the people around them. He didn't crowd her. Not enough to draw attention, but his proximity was deliberate. A living shield without announcing it, a quiet sentinel who'd seen enough missions go sideways to know when you didn't let the kid out of arm's reach. His rifle swept arcs that weren't just about the gate. His gaze flickered once, subtly, to Halloran and Dance on the flank. Both men were perfect on paper. Too perfect. Halloran's shoulders were a fraction too tight under his armor, his breathing not in rhythm with the squad. Dance's stillness had patience in it, yes, but not the kind born of Marine doctrine. It was the kind of patience that waited for its own signal, its own agenda. IT clocked it too. He didn't turn his head, he didn't break posture, but a quiet calculation shifted under his stance like a weight redistributing on the line. Not enough to call out now, not with lives in the balance and a firefight waiting just beyond the fence. But it was logged, etched in the iron ledger in his mind. Something is wrong in my line. Ahead, 2 Deathwatch sentries lounged at the gate. One leaned on his rifle like it weighed more than his shift was worth, taking long draughts from a tobacco stick, embers flaring dull red in the dark. Sorry. The other paced slow arcs, his eyes roaming the perimeter with a tension that suggested unease, but not yet fear. Their voices carried softly on the breeze. "Did you hear about the carrier?" the smoker muttered, tone halfway between a joke and a complaint. "Yeah," the other answered absently, his gaze flicking to the settlement's dim heart. "Bad luck. Probably won't get her running quick enough to haul everything out." "Don't jinx it," the smoker grumbled, dragging deep on his tobacco. "We did well here. Supplies like this, we're set for months if we can lift them." If, The other echoed darkly, scanning again. What if they got a signal out? What if someone's on their way? Stars above! You're always looking on the worst side of... The words choked off in a wet breath as IT slipped through the brush like water over stone, his vibroblade flashing once, a quick surgical kiss into the cervical spine. The sentry sagged with a soft exhale, but he never finished. IT eased the body down like a man handling a sleeping child. No sound but the faint rasp of armor against dust. Across the gap, Sergeant Esho mirrored the movement, his own target folding without time for a final breath. Both bodies vanished into the brush, dragged just far enough to erase their absence for precious minutes. Marin had stilled to a statue during the strike. Breath tight in her throat, one hand ghosting over the tags threaded through her fingers like a talisman. She didn't flint when IT's blade whispered out and back. She'd trained with him for 2 months. Watched these men move with the same fluid lethality Ethan had once taught her. It wasn't the elegance of the Jedi. It was the old, hard practicality of men who survived too many wars. She reached tentatively with the Force, her movements slow and deliberate, a quiet sweep brushing the edge of the village. A flicker of fear from the hostages came sharp as broken glass. Beyond that, only ordinary minds, tense and armed. There was no weight of another Force user lurking nearby, but she knew better than to trust that entirely. The memory of Needles, of Laurel's cold presence, flickered unbidden in her mind, and she shut it down hard, pulling her awareness tight. IT's voice came low over the comm, even as his eyes scanned the downed sentries. No comms. Same here, Esho murmured, stepping back from the second body, his rifle ready. Odd. If they knew about the carrier Kira took out, you'd expect regular check-ins. It means they won't be missing bodies right away. Another Marine breathed, relief masked under pragmatism. Buys us a window. Marin's eyes closed briefly, the Force tugging at her again. She raised one hand slightly pointing left, her voice pitched low. 3 more. Checkpoint about 300 meters out. They're static. IT's head dipped once. He pointed to 3 shadows on his right, sent them looping toward the contact. Another trio slipped across the dirt path on his signal, keeping low as they vanished between buildings. Go, he breathed, nothing wasted in the single word. Marin's lips tucked into the faintest smile, more grim than pleased, watching the silent choreography of it. Her fingers brushed her saber's hilt, a grounding check, before she forced her presence even smaller. If another Force user was out there, they'd have to dig through layers of silence to find her. Greer shifted with her, close but unintrusive, his boots falling softly in her wake. Every line of him said professional Marine, every motion was disciplined, but the watchfulness never left his posture. His rifle tracked wider than most, catching flanks, backs, angles where a friendly could put a knife in before an enemy had the chance. He didn't trust this op, and his instincts had never lied to him. IT knelt at the next corner, the silhouette of the checkpoint faint ahead, lit by the glow of lanterns. His hand flicked, quick and sharp over the comm. Esho, you and Dance, Sierra 1. Copy, Esho said, his voice a low gravel, already pulling a sniper rig free from his kit. Dance mirrored him, silent as ever, but too quiet. A patient coil that didn't feel like Marine discipline. It felt older. Colder. Chalmers, IT murmured next. Barn on the south side reported empty. Take Leos, Sierra 2. Acknowledged, came the reply. Their boots are already moving. IT glanced around the corner again, weighing the approach and mind-mapping paths and risks in real time. His calm was iron, but Greer caught the shift in his shoulders, the tell of a commander feeling the same undercurrent he felt himself. Something off in their own ranks, a wrong note in what should have been a clean chord. But there were hostages in there. Priorities were carved in stone. Whatever ghosts walked their line tonight would have to keep masks on until the clock struck and the knives turned inward. Until then, Greer kept his silent post near the girl with the fire in her eyes, every sense alive to danger, whether it wore Deathwatch colors or their own. Roving shadows. The settlement slept beneath a haze of low clouds and the muted glow of lantern light bleeding between ramshackle roofs. Dust hung in the air like breath held too long, carrying with it the scent of burnt metal, old fear, and the faint copper tang of spilled blood. Silence wasn't natural here. It felt imposed, held together only by the presence of armed men who thought their dominance absolute. But beneath the surface quiet, the air was strung taut with tension, as if the ground itself knew the ghost that hunted tonight. Marin knelt just behind Captain IT's shoulder, her boots silent in the packed dirt, her breath shallow against the faintly shifting breeze. The map on his gauntlet cast a dim glow over his face, lines of streets and scattered buildings broken by the path of a roving patrol that swept back and forth like the pendulum of a killing clock. Sorry. Okay. She let her eyes drift closed, pushing out the rest of the world until only the threads remained. The pulse of danger, the shapes of men moving through shadow, the subtle intent woven into every corner of the settlement. IT's placements made sense. Sierra 1 and 2 were already ghosts above and ahead, settled into their high vantage points like patient predators. That left them and one other squad to work the ground approach, running the needle between patrols and positions dug in and around the hostages. "What about us, sir?" she asked, her voice low and controlled. "Where do we fit in?" IT's finger traced a looping arc on the map before he glanced at her, his eyes steady. The weight of command etched in every line of his face. "We circle wide, come in from their blind side if we can." His gaze sharpened. "Durza, you know these people better than any of us. If they realize they're losing, if it's a no-win fight, would they surrender?" "Hi, Stitch Doll! Good luck with your op tonight!" Her breath caught for a beat, the memory of Galan burning like a fresh brand against her ribs, the smell of fire, the men who never laid down their arms even when hope had bled out of them. Bastine followed, darker. Her tone when she answered was flat, devoid of the comfort of possibility. "No, sir. They believe in what they're fighting for. They won't stop until they're dead." IT absorbed that truth in silence, a flicker of understanding in his expression. Not surprise, just grim confirmation. He toggled his comm. "All units, listen up. We're not getting a peaceful solution here." Durza confirms they'll fight to the last man. Expect them to get vicious when they realize we've got them pinned. Priority is still the hostages. Sierra 1, Sierra 2, hold overwatch, wait for my word. LT? "Copy, Cap," came the lieutenant's reply, a hushed echo over the channel. "We've got one last roving patrol ahead," IT continued, his voice calm, steel. "Then 2 entrenched groups around the hostages. Stick to the plan, clean and quiet until it can't be." "Aye, sir," came the muted chorus, discipline stitched tight across the net. Marin flexed her hands against the grip of her blaster rifle, knuckles pale under the gloves. The saber at the back of her belt was a familiar weight, the shuriken a whisper of another kind of fight. But tonight would start with Marine doctrine and end however it had to. She reached again, just enough to feel the tug of fear where the hostages huddled, but no dark swell of a force user close enough to strike first. She prayed that her instincts weren't lying, but Coruscant and Korriban had burned the naivete out of her. She was ready, or as ready as she'd ever be. When they moved, it was like the ground itself bore them forward, the squad flowing low between shadows and shattered fences. IT was the point. Every step a calculation. Marin was close to the rear, 2 veterans closing the column behind her. Greer stayed near, silent and constant, his presence a living wall that kept the tremor of unease from breaking through her focus. She didn't need to look to know his eyes weren't just on the perimeter. They swept their own men, catching Halloran's fraction to perfect pace. There we go. Oops. Here we go. Something wrong, something off, but the masks held for now. 2/3 of the way to the hostages, the patrol appeared like wraiths sliding from the darkness. 6 figures in matte armor, rifles up, sweeping arcs of lightless menace through the dust. Curate saw discipline at its finest. Tight, deliberate, the kind of killers who didn't rattle when they were hunted. Ati's hand dropped in a fist, the squad closing ranks instantly. Rifles angled, movement fracturing outward to flank and catch them in a deadly pincer. Greer's hand on Marin's arm was brief but grounding before he slipped forward into cover fire. Controlled bursts cutting orange arcs through the night. Marin moved with them, dropping to a crouch, firing clean, disciplined shots. One death watch fell, then another, armor sparking under precise hits, but the rest didn't break. They shifted formation, returning fire with brutal accuracy, pinning Marines with bursts aimed to kill time, not lives. And then, Marin felt it. A ripple, wrong and heavy, dragging against the thread of the force like a hooked line. Darza. Esso's voice rasped over the comm, low and sharp. 3 o'clock. She turned just in time to see her hunter peel away from the fight. A head taller, armor black as cut obsidian, matte and unmarked save for the sigils burning red on each shoulder. The Russelor moved with a confidence born of something more than training, a dark undercurrent in every step. Marin felt the intent even before she saw the rifle come up, not at her first, but at the men shielding her. Silenced rounds spat through the dark, aimed at joints and weapons designed to wound and clear a path without raising alarms to their main force. Marin's breath stilled. The force unfurled inside her like a coiled animal waking, every sense stretched razor thin. This one wasn't just a soldier. This was something older, sharper, the kind of threat she'd seen on Coruscant and thought she'd left bleeding in the warehouse dust. Her hands tightened on the rifle. There was no time for fear. The hostages still waited, and this woman wasn't going to take her without a fight. We have an ad in just under 5 minutes. Wow. Okay. Clash in the dust. The world erupted in chaos before the tension had time to settle. Cap, incoming! Chalmers' voice cracked sharply over the comm from his high perch, tight with urgency, and the same heartbeat the quiet weight of the night shattered under a hail of suppressed fire. The Marines reacted as one, years of discipline snapping into motion. Boots scuffed against hard-packed dirt, bodies throwing themselves toward the scant cover of rocks, tree stumps, and shallow depressions that barely deserved the word defensible. Marin dove low, sliding behind a jagged boulder. Her breath coming fast as dust rose around her. The air hissed with slugs, rounds cutting lethal lines in every direction. Beside her, Captain IT cursed under his breath as one round found its mark, punching into his leg just above the knee. He caught himself on his free hand, his jaw tight but silent. A lifetime of training keeping the pain buried under command instinct. Marin's mouth set in a hard, grim line as she ripped at the seam of her fatigue blouse with her teeth and fingers, tearing a strip of the lining free. Without hesitation, she shoved the improvised bandage into his waiting hand. "Can you still fight?" Her voice was low, roughened by urgency, but steady, all edges and no fear. Ati's nod was tight, wordless, his face drawn with pain, but resolute. He bound the wound with brutal efficiency, biting down on a hiss as he tightened the fabric, and then slammed his back against the boulder. His power cell was checked, his weapon reset. He rolled to a semi-kneeling position with a controlled breath. Marin's hand gripped his shoulder for a heartbeat, a silent promise they both understood, before she rose just enough to send a blistering spray of coherent bolts toward the source of the fire. The night answered with a predator's whisper. 2 slugs cut the air near her head, not meant to kill, only to test her, meant for the mind, not the body. Marin's gut clenched. She ducked back, heartbeat hammering against the cage of her ribs. "Crap," she muttered under her breath, knowing the game her unseen opponent played. It was deliberate, a challenge. Show me what you are, Force user. Another volley ripped toward them. Hesitant, Marin reached out on instinct, the barest thread of will nudging one slug off its true course. It struck the ground inches from IT's boot, throwing dirt over his armor. He swallowed, glanced at her once, just enough to read the apology in her eyes before she whispered, "Sorry." The second slug punched into a tree behind them, splinters bursting like shrapnel. Somewhere in the haze, the Russelor took note of that minute interference. Marin felt the ripple of cold calculation in the force even before she saw the figure shift. Slow, deliberate movements repositioning through the darkness, hunting with patience. This was no ordinary soldier. The Marines fought hard, even as their injuries mounted, with the grit of veterans showing in every return shot and every controlled shift to cover another brother or sister in arms. They all knew who Marin was. They weren't going to let Deathwatch take her, not while breath remained in their lungs. Greer, close enough to touch if she reached out, anchored the line on their flank. His rifle barked in short, vicious bursts, suppressing the enemy with unerring precision. Between bursts, his eyes scanned Marin, IT, and every shadow moving in their perimeter. Nothing slipped past him. Not tonight. Not with her in the field. Two Marines peeled off to work a pincer angle on the patrol, vanishing into the gloom with the kind of ghost steps born of years fighting impossible odds. Marin caught only the faint shimmer of their movement before dropping low, belly to the dirt, and crawling to the edge of her hiding place. A quick glance, a held breath, and she popped her on the side of the boulder, loosing a pair of clean shots before rolling back under cover. The air was electric now, charged not just by blaster fire, but by something older, darker, that was watching from the edges. I'm gonna stop there because we're about to have an ad in about 10 seconds. Oh. And I need water. Hope you guys are enjoying the story. It's getting pretty intense. I will see you guys back here in a minute and a half. Please go get yourselves a drink of water. I'm gonna do that. All right, my friends, we are back from our ad break. Thank you so much for hanging out. I appreciate you all being here with me tonight. Uh, This is getting really intense. Oh my goodness. Uh, yeah. The Russelor advanced, unhurried, deliberate, cutting through the storm of marine fire as though time itself bent around her path. Marin watched her empty her rifle methodically, each shot buying space to step closer, and closer still. Then the weapon clicked dry. Smoothly, the woman slung it over her shoulder and drew a biscot from her belt, the long blade glinting dully under the haze. From a rack on her back came a second weapon, a single forged throwing knife, gripless, functional, and deadly. The silence that followed was only a heartbeat long. Then, with inhuman calm, the woman vaulted the boulder, shielding Marin and IT. The knife flashed, spinning toward the nearest marine who'd caught her movement, while the Biscard carved an arc aimed squarely at Marin's head. The knife sparked mid-flight, not just steel, but something humming with caged energy, wrong in a way Marin felt in her teeth. IT moved first, his pain forgotten. With a grunt, he lunged forward, his combat vibroblade slashing out, catching the Russeller's leg even as he rolled, his sidearm barking point blank. Marin dropped sideways, her hand flicking out on instinct. The knife veered just enough, slamming it to the dirt inches from IT's leg, quivering. She filed away the electric glow for later, the thought sharp and unwelcome. This wasn't just tech. The Biscard came down with a snarl of sparks as it glanced off Marin's helmet and skittered over her combat plating. The impact rattled her teeth, sending a flare of pain across her skull, but the armor held. Without it, she'd have lost her arm, or worse. Twisting low, she fired a flurry of bolts point blank, the muzzle almost kissing the enemy's armor, and then followed it with a knife flicked from her belt in a single fluid motion. The Russelor was faster than coherent thought. She twisted mid-leap, the bolt scoring her shoulder plate, singeing armor but drawing no blood. A booted kick snapped toward IT's head, a vicious strike paired with a sudden invisible force that slammed into his chest like a battering, throwing him off his knees and onto his back. Marin's breath hissed between her teeth, her eyes going wide. The force was alive and angry in this one, a torrent under iron discipline. Her knife never found its mark. The woman bent its path almost before it left Marin's hand, the blade tumbling wide until Marin reached back with a thought and called it home, steel slapping back into her palm. "Criff," she muttered, voice low and sharp, tasting metal on her tongue. She flicked her gaze to IT. He lay stunned momentarily, gasping for air, but alive. Greer had already shifted forward, suppressing fire, cutting the night in disciplined bursts to force the Russelor's attention to him. Marin felt him there, solid, unwavering, a wall at her back and a promise in his silence. You are not alone in this fight. IT rolled to his knees, grimacing, slamming a fresh power cell home with practiced precision. Even half breathless, his aim was true. Shots cracked toward the woman's neck seam, toward her knees, the soft spots most armor couldn't save. This wasn't over. Not yet. The knight still held breath, the next move quelled tight in the dust between them, waiting to see which side would draw blood first. Through fire and breath. The field lay quiet for only a heartbeat. Smoke and ozone clung to the air, sharp as knives in the lungs. There we go. The kind of battlefield stillness that came only in the spaces between firebursts and screams. Beyond the jagged line of rock and bent grass, you could still hear the deathwatch shifting, their boots grinding in the dirt, the rasp of metal against metal as they repositioned for another strike. Somewhere behind, Greer's low, measured voice cut through the comms, a reminder of presence, of steel, of the kind of watchful patience only years of survival and command could temper. He was there, always just close enough to step in, far enough to let her choose to stand or fall on her own terms. Marin drew in a slow, ragged breath, tasting dust and iron. Her helmet felt too heavy, her pulse too loud in her ears, but she forced each inhale to steady, counting it out like Stefan had taught her long ago. Calm. Focus. Don't let them see you fray. She rose to her feet, boots sinking slightly into the damp soil, moving off from where IT crouched, still breathing hard, her carbine trembling just slightly in his hands. He had one leg stretched awkwardly beneath him, bandage already darkening with blood, but his jaw was clenched, his eyes locked on her like he'd rather bleed out standing than let her take this alone. Across the field, the blonde-haired Russeler twisted her body unnaturally, her movements edged with a wrongness Marin could feel more than see. Bolts hissed past, scoring the space where she'd stood a heartbeat earlier, grazing plates and chewing bark. Her free hand snapped out towards one of the Marines flanking left, and lightning, bright, searing and alive, erupted from her fingertips, clawing towards its target. Marin's gut went cold. Instinct screamed to move, to stop it, and before the thought could catch up, her left hand carved in the air, fingers hooking invisible lines, the force rising beneath her skin. The Russelor tore sideways, her boots scraping, her snarl cutting the field as she was wrenched from her prey and staggered towards open ground. IT made no sound, but his shoulders eased a fraction, his rifle lifting again in grim defiance. Marin dragged in another breath, her lungs aching. With her boots planted in the grass, she gathered the next shove tighter, slamming it outward, and watched the woman stumble hard, her boots plowing trenches in the soil. The Russelor's eyes, pale, cold, and merciless, snapped to Marin with new focus, and this time, she didn't hesitate. Her fist slammed into the ground, the world shuddered, and a rippling force wave tore across the field. It hit like a landslide. Marin hit the dirt, rolling, her breath knocked clean out of her chest. By the time she staggered upright, her knees shaky, the next strike came. A torrent of lightning so brutal it drowned out thought and breath alike. Pain rippled along her nerves, white fire crawling beneath the skin. She collapsed to one knee, her teeth grinding hard enough to crack, every muscle seizing as the crackling energy ate at her resolve. This was worse than Bastine, worse than Joran, worse than anything. The woman stalked closer, deliberate, savoring it, the arcs dancing from her hands to Marin's armor with cruel precision. It wanted to break her. It wanted her to fall. But Marin had learned. Pain was a trick, a weapon to blind and bind, a tool to make you forget you were more than what they could do to you. She shut out everything but her breath, slow and deliberate, her eyes squeezing shut for one heartbeat, then another, sinking deeper into the quiet place she barely understood but could always feel. Callista's voice from old lessons whispered somewhere distant. Release. Don't fight the river. The river rose. Her palms came together slowly, dragging against the invisible current of the force, electricity licking at her forearms, raising every hair along her neck. It felt unnatural, dangerous, like swallowing thunder, but she pulled anyway, teeth bared in a silent defiance, gathering the energy that burned her alive and dragging it between her hands until it flared, a trembling sphere of blue fire pulsing in her grip. With a hoarse, wordless cry, Marin thrust it back, shoving with every shred of will she had left. The Russeler swore, her arms snapping out to meet the charge, and the field became a battle of will and hate and raw, screaming energy. The woman braced, sliding in the dirt, her veins standing out in her neck, but Marin didn't let go. Not yet. Sweat ran cold down her spine, her vision narrowing, her legs quivering as she reached again into the force, yanking the Russeler sideways, dragging her away from IT and out into the open ground where neither Marine would be collateral to this nightmare duel. And then, the Deathwatch doubled down. Lightning surged from both hands now, weaving into a massive, seething orb, the air around it humming, the hair on Marin's arms standing high from the charge building between them. Krith, Marin whispered, her voice raw. She braced, lifted both hands, and when the sphere came hurtling towards her, guided by the woman's murderous intent, she tried to turn it aside. It was too much, too fast. The impact smashed through her defense, sent her flying. She hit the ground hard, breath tearing from her chest and her body convulsed, spasms racking every muscle as she fought for air. Her vision went black at the edges. But she wasn't done. Another breath, dragging and uneven. Another reach for the river, deeper this time, past fear, past pain, to that strange and unsteady glow inside. When her eyes opened again, the world was sharper, tinged in silver light, the force alive and burning under her skin. Electricity rippled along her armor like a second skin before vanishing into her cupped palms. She pushed it forward again, a last desperate strike, the hiss and flare of her saber following, orange-black light cutting between them like a promise made true. The whistler screamed, curses turning feral. Energy collided mid-air, imploding violently, the shockwave ripping grass from earth, throwing both combatants away from each other like ragdolls. Marin slammed into a tree, stars bursting across her vision, her knees buckling when she finally managed to stagger upright. The Marines were moving now, crouched low as they edged closer, their rifles ready, eyes tracking every twitch of the Rousselor's frame. The woman tore herself free of splintered wood, her face bloodied, eyes blazing hate that felt older than this fight, older than Marin's very name. They met in the middle of the clearing again, steel and lightning crashing. Marin ducking, lunging, her blade slicing, smoke into the Rousselor's leg plates. Sparks hissed, the woman snarled, turning feral again. A kick hit Marin square on the chest like a hammer and sent her stumbling just in time to see another lightning charge swing slice the air where she'd been. Movement flickered behind the woman. IT and another Marine were flanking. One with a blade, one with a carbine, timing it perfectly. The final strike came together, the vibroblade cutting her opponent behind the knee, shots cracking toward her neck and back. The Rousselor barely had time to turn, a guttural scream tearing free as pain finally broke her focus. A bolt slammed into the back of her skull, snapping her head forward. She crumpled sideways, hitting dirt with a heavy thud. The last arc of energy licked from her biscade to Marin's chest, staggering her backward to one knee. She dropped then, armor scraping against the ground, her lungs pulling in shallow, rattled breaths. Around them, silence finally fell, broken only by the crackle of scorched grass and the soft, deliberate footsteps of Marines closing in. Greer among them. He didn't speak. He didn't need to. His presence was enough. A solid, steady weight in the chaos, the quiet anchor that kept her from tipping all the way over the edge. I might be able to get through chapter 6. We'll see. That took a little bit longer than I planned. Sorry. Oh, it was also 20 pages. That would be why. The quiet keeps us alive. Veil Doctrine, Oral Maxim 7. In the heartbeat before the fight, the silence is not absence, it is control. The breath held steady, the mind sharpened, hands ready but still. The veil teaches that survival begins not with a strike, but with the discipline to listen before you act. Okay. I need water. The weight. Oh, sorry. Chapter 6. Ash on the Wind. The weight of survival. Smoke drifted low across the churned earth, a bitter haze that clung to scorched grass and the scent of blaster fire. The forest edge felt too quiet now, as if the fight had stolen every scrap of breath from the world and left only its echoes. Marines moved through the clearing with deliberate caution, weapons lowered but not forgotten, their boots crunching through debris and spent casings. Somewhere off to the west, a medic's voice carried, clipped and urgent before being swallowed by the weighty silence that lingered after chaos. Captain IT stood a little apart, his helmet clipped to his belt, scanning the perimeter with the sharp, restless eyes of a man who'd learned long ago not to trust a quiet battlefield. Two of his Marines were down, marked by the white tarps his medics had laid over them, and several others were getting patched where they sat or leaned against trees. It was a cost he'd expected, but that didn't make it any easier to stomach. The Death Watch cell had been good, better than most they'd fought planetside, but that Force user had turned the fight from ugly to near disaster. "Has anyone seen Durza?" His voice cut across the commnet, low and tight. He hadn't laid eyes on her since the clash broke apart, and with the unknown Force user in play, his gut was twisting in ways he didn't like. There was a beat of static. No immediate response. The wind sighed through the treetops, carrying the copper tang of ozone. Then, movement. A figure on the ground not far from the tree line, rolling weakly onto her side. Smoke curled off the shattered plates of her armor. Her helmet was cracked through, sparking faintly from ruptured circuitry as she tried to wrench it off with trembling fingers. Oh, goodness. The effort cost her. Her arms shook with every attempt until, on the fourth try, it came free and hit the ground beside her with a dull, final-sounding crunch. Marin gasped like she'd been holding her breath for hours, coughing on smoke and blood. Every movement drew a ragged wince. The front of her armor was scorched black, streaked with fresh gashes from where the other woman's muscade had found its mark. She was barely upright, struggling to push herself to her knees. "I thought she might have drifted this way," Greer's voice replied, rough and edged with worry as he loped through the debris, scanning left and right. Then he saw it. The smoke rising from her plates, and his gut clenched. He barked over his shoulder, sharp enough to cut the quiet. "Captain, over here!" He didn't wait for an answer. He was already there, dropping to one knee beside Marin. "Easy," he murmured, steady hands catching her shoulder before she pitched forward. The canteen came free from his belt with practiced ease, the cap twisted open one-handed. "Slow sips, kid. Don't try to talk yet." Marin coughed around the water anyway, her throat raw, her lips pale. It took a moment before she could rasp anything out. "I'm okay," she managed, her voice shaky and thin. Her gloved hand drifted up to her head and came away tacky with blood. She blinked at it like she wasn't sure if she should be surprised. "The other Force user, is she—" Greer's jaw ticked, his eyes flicking to where the woman's body lay in the grass some distance away, crumpled in a way that promised she wasn't getting up again. He shook his head once. "You know the saying. See the other guy? You're still breathing. That's what counts." He twisted, shouting over his shoulder, "Medic! On me!" Marin's gaze followed his briefly before she winced and let her head fall, palms patting weakly at the ground. "Saber," she whispered, the word half-breathed like a plea. "I had it." Greer caught the glance, scanning outward until he spotted the weapon glinting several meters away. "Stay put," he ordered, not unkindly as he rose and strode over to retrieve it. Behind him, IT arrived at a clipped jog, his visor sweeping over the scene before settling on Marin. He crouched beside her, voice steady despite the tension still humming under his skin. "Shuttle and Havoc, Assault 01. Site secure. We've got wounded. Prep cure for medevac priority." He waited for acknowledgement, listening hard before clipping his column back to his vest. By then, Greer was returning, her saber in hand. He knelt once more, laying it across Marin's trembling palms. She curled her fingers around it like it was the only anchor left in the storm. "How are the hostages?" she asked, barely louder than the breeze. "Shaken," IT answered, lowering his head. "Some injured. They executed the leader before we got there." His voice darkened, a grim thread of anger woven through every word. "To make a point." Marin swore softly, her breath hitching. "Family? We don't know yet," Greer said, though his tone left little room for false hope. Sorry. IT shifted, sitting back on his heels with a faint shake of his head. Third group dropped in mid-fight. Valkyrie's med shuttles are on approach now. We're detaching from Cure, going up for debrief. He tried for dry humor, but failed halfway. Do things always escalate like this around you, Durza? Her cheeks burned under grime and blood. Seems to, she admitted quietly, not lifting her gaze. Some old grudge against my family. Duran. Beyond that, I don't know anymore. For a moment, there was only the sound of boots crunching across the ground, low voices carrying orders. And then Greer asked, his voice pitched low, "You good going up to the ship?" She barely noticed the slip into Mando, and she whispered, "Lek, just wasn't ready for that much. Not in the Force. Not like that." IT opened his mouth to answer and then stopped. A prickle ran down his spine, a different kind of instinct tugging him sideways. Greer felt it too, turning his head just enough to follow IT's line of sight. Halloran stood a few meters off, just outside the medic's perimeter, too still. His helmet on, visor opaque, rifle cradled in his arms, posture all wrong for a Marine whose squad mate was half broken on the ground. Watching. He was just watching. IT's eyes narrowed, a flicker of wordless communication passing between him and Greer. Neither said anything, aloud, not yet. They just marked the moment, the way Halloran's stance didn't shift, how he didn't take a step closer to help, or how his hand lingered near her sidearm like he had something else in mind and was waiting for a reason to use it. For now, they said nothing. The ambush had been bloody enough, and until they were off this rock and clear of civilian eyes, cover had to hold. But both men tucked the sight away, their unis carved deep and sharp. And in the dirt at their feet, Marin sat hunched over her saber, her breath coming in slow and even pulls, her young face too pale beneath the grime. Smoke curled upward, ash on the wind, while shadows lengthened at the edge of the clearing. And not all of them were cast by the setting sun. We have an ad starting in 4 minutes and 8 seconds. Yeah, I can read, I promise. Oh, man. Alright. Echoes in the quiet. The Magcon shimmered like liquid glass as the shuttle drifted through. A hum of repulsor lifts filling the cabin. The battle carrier loomed outside, vast and unmoving, a fortress in the cold silence of upper orbit. The steady murmur of the pilot and co-pilot on approach channels should have been grounding, the kind of background noise Marines clung to after a fight. But Marin couldn't shake the unease coiling low in her gut, a weight that had nothing to do with the burns searing beneath her armor. She leaned back against the headrest, her eyes half-lidded, fighting the tremor in her hands. Every nerve felt raw. The energy she'd pulled into herself back on Collier still lingered, sharp and untempered, like lightning caged under her skin. Each breath scraped against her throat. The medic's work in the field had been just enough to keep her moving, nothing more. Greer sat across from her, his helmet off, the ever-present watchfulness in his eyes. He hadn't said much since they boarded, just kept her water canteen within reach. One gauntleted hand braced against the side of the bench every time the shuttle banked. He didn't need to speak, his presence was enough to remind her she wasn't drifting alone. But even Greer's steady calm felt strained, stretched thin in a way she didn't often see. She followed his line of sight once, briefly, and caught Halloran watching her from further down the bench. Nothing overt, nothing she could pin down. Just eyes on her a moment too long before he looked away. His face was neutral, the kind of blank professionalism every Marine wore when there was wounded aboard. And yet, something about it was wrong. A little too still. A little too patient. The weight in her stomach tightened, an instinct prickling at the edges of her battered focus. She tore her gaze away, her jaw tense, trying to tell herself she was imagining it. 2 minutes out, the pilot called. The co-pilot's hand rested lightly on the landing strut lever, voice low as he confirmed approach vectors, routine words, routine tone. Marin drew in a shaky breath and let it out slowly, forcing her hands to stay still in her lap. The shuttle angled through Valkyrie's hangar threshold, a wash of golden light spilling across the deck plating below. Repulsor lifts kicked up dust motes as they settled into hover, and then descended with a muted hiss of hydraulics. Gear down, the pilot confirmed. Strike one as engines cold. Oops. Wow. Hang on a sec. There we go. The crew compartment hatch hissed open, cool recycled air replacing the faint scorched metal tang that clung to Marin's armor. The squad filed out in pairs, boots hitting the deck with practiced movement. Marin followed last. Helmet cradled in her fingers, every step a reminder that her body hadn't forgiven her yet. She caught sight of the hangar's vast interior, the rows of Nighthawks, deck crews waving signals, the transparent steel-walled control room overlooking it all, but the scale of it barely registered through the fog in her mind. Greer was there before she could falter, one hand hovering close in case her knees buckled. He didn't say a word, just kept pace on her right flank, scanning the hangar with that sharp, quiet awareness of his, a protector's stance, unspoken but unwavering. IT's voice carried over the hum of engines and deck chatter, cutting through the haze. "Durza," he called, striding toward her with the lieutenant in tow. His tone was steady, clipped, but his eyes flicked once toward Halloran before settling on her, something unreadable in his expression. And I'm going to stop right there because we're about to be in an ad if you're not already. I will see you guys in a minute and a half. Get yourselves a drink of water because I need one too. Alright, my friends. Welcome back to the ad break. I do hope you're enjoying the story. It's getting intense. Let's just say that. Oh, and we're not anywhere near done with the story yet. This is only chapter 6. We've got your bunk squared away. Medical first. He didn't phrase it as a suggestion. She nodded, her lips pressed thin. Her breath still came shallow, each inhale edged with heat. The lieutenant gestured toward the lift at the far end of the bay. This way. As they moved, Gur lingered half a step behind her, close enough to catch her if she slipped, far enough to keep her pride intact. Halloran fell in at the edge of their little formation, his expression the picture of concern when IT glanced his way, but his eyes never once met Marin's again. That told Greer more than words ever could. He exchanged a quick, wordless look with IT as they passed beneath the overhead gantries. Both men understood. Halloran's act was good, but not good enough to erase that sliver of unease. Not here. Not now. Whatever game he was playing, it wasn't over. And as the lift doors hissed shut, sealing the four of them inside, Marin felt the weight in her stomach deepen, her instincts whispering what her mind refused to name. This wasn't finished. Not by a long shot. Why is it that I always lose my voice after I drink water? I don't know. Anyway. Shadows under the skin. The lift doors hissed open on deck 7, spilling them into the hushed corridor leading toward the forward medical bay. The lighting was bright, but sterile. The kind of brilliance that made every burn, every scorch mark on her armor stand out like a mark of failure. Marin bit down on the inside of her cheek and kept moving, her boots dragging just a fraction as the deck had thickened underfoot. Greer clocked the way her shoulders trembled every third step. He didn't comment, just shifted closer to her side. One hand hovered a breath away from her back, not touching, but near enough she'd know the offer was there if her legs gave out. Halloran followed 3 paces behind, silent as a shadow. His face was composed, every inch the concerned squadmate, but his eyes never lingered on Marin long enough to be caught again. Greer still felt it, though. Felt him there, like static before a storm, the kind that prickled under armor plates and set instincts on edge, the kind you didn't ignore. He filed it away, kept his expression neutral, every sense straining without drawing attention. At the doors to medical, an orderly in pale blue scrubs looked up, ready with a standard issue greeting. Reporting injuries? Marine, Durza, Greer answered before Marin could strain herself. His tone had a granite edge that brooked no delay. Needs a bed. Privacy, if you can swing it. The orderly's eyes flicked over Marin's scorched gear, the way her fingers curled tight around her cracked helmet and nodded briskly. This way. They stepped inside, enveloped by the low hum of monitors and sterilizing fields. Only a few beds were occupied. Most patients were either dozing or waiting for clearance. There we go. Marin followed the orderly to a bed near the far corner, away from most of the noise, and tried to climb up on her own. Her arms shook halfway through the motion, stubborn pride holding her from calling for help. The effort pulled a hiss from between her clenched teeth, sharp enough to make Greer's jaw clench. Easy, a warm, familiar voice cut in before he could move. A medic crossed the space at a quick pace, reaching out instinctively, and then stopping short as recognition hit. Marin? The voice was startled and breathless. What in the stars happened to you? Marin blinked, dazed, heart stumbling in her chest. Catherine? The name slipped out like a question. For half a second, the harsh lines of the last few hours eased, not from comfort, but sheer surprise. She'd forgotten Stefan Card's youngest had taken up the fleet medical work, a medic's badge pinned where a saber might have been. The hesitation cost her her balance, and she had to lean hard on the bed frame to keep from sliding back down. Pain lit along her ribs like fire. Her vision blurred, and she bit down on the noise, threatening to escape. Sorry. Goodness. I'm losing my voice. Give me 1 second. So sorry. Catherine frowned, her eyes sharp now, her hand bracing Marion's elbow. Sit before you fall. Stars, you're a mess. She snagged a scanner from the wall, gestures brisk but careful. Training exercise gone wrong? Marin swallowed hard, the words rough when they came out. We picked up a distress call from a colony, thought it was pirates. It wasn't. Her voice was a low rasp. They were taking prisoners. The memory cut sharp and hot. She pushed it down before it shook made her voice shake. We made contact, got separated. They had Death Watch insignia. Sorry. That name made Catherine pause mid-motion, her gaze snapping to Marin's face. Them? She said, quietly, her tone serious. Marin gave a small, tight nod. One of them was a Force user. She stared at her hands on her knees, every muscle rigid. I fought something like that twice before. Catherine let out a slow breath, her eyes flicking over the battered armor and then the cracked helmet. Well, you're lucky to be here telling me that. She turned the scanner on, its quiet chirp filling the silence. You've got busted ribs, burned muscle fibers, and transparent steel in your cheeks. The helmet saved your life. Halloran shifted near the doorway, leaning casually against the frame, his arms folded. He looked every inch the concerned squad mate standing watch, silent and unintrusive. But Greer noticed how his eyes tracked every move, every word exchanged. He stepped subtly between Halloran and Marin's bed, angling his body to block the line of sight. To anyone else, it looked like nothing more than a protective instinct for a wounded comrade, but the message was there in his stance. You don't get near her. Not now. Not ever. Marin breathed out slowly, a shaky sigh as Catherine pulled out a tray of instruments. I'll need to clean out the shards before our back-to treatment, Catherine said, her voice gentler now. Lie back and let me do the hard part. Marin's hands fisted against the blanket for a moment before she obeyed, lowering herself with care, a soft grunt escaping despite herself. Her heart hammered against her ribs, not just from pain, but from the weight of eyes in the room. Halloran's presence felt like a blade held just out of sight. Every instinct screamed wrong, wrong, wrong. She forced herself to focus on Catherine's calm tone, on Greer's solid presence at her side like an anchor in open water. The sterilizer hissed. The instruments hummed quietly. The faint thrum of Valkyrie's engines deep in the deck. Marin kept her breathing even as the metal clicked softly into her face, letting the medic's practiced hands do their work. But the unease never left her. It coiled deeper instead, a silent warning that the fight wasn't over. Whatever waited on the horizon would make this look like a warm-up. And from the corner of his eye, Greer watched Halloran watching them, every sense braced, because he knew the same thing Marin did, even if neither said it aloud. This was just the beginning. The weight of watchers. Catherine's hands were steady until the last dressing was taped down. She made a soft sound of satisfaction, the kind a medic made when at least part of the damage had been handled, and brushed an errant strand of hair back from her face with the back of her wrist. Marin sat on the bed, still in her borrowed duty jumpsuit, the color drained from her face, but her jaw set like stone. That should hold until you can get proper rest, Catherine said. Her tone shifted, light but firm, the tone of a medic who wasn't about to lose an argument, which is exactly what you're going to do. No detours, no, I'll just stop by the deck first. Marin gave a slight nod, but her eyes didn't quite meet Catherine's. The kind of agreement given because arguing would cost too much breath, not because she believed she could actually rest. Catherine glanced over her shoulder at Greer. She's yours, Master Sergeant. If she so much as thinks about standing on a parade ground before I clear her, you report her straight back here. Understood? Aye, Greer said, his tone quiet and solid. He didn't need to raise his voice for Catherine to hear the weight in it. He'd see it done. The medic gave Marin's shoulder a last gentle squeeze before stepping back. Go, she told them both. Her eyes softened out. Get her somewhere safe. And then she was gone, moving down the bay to another patient, leaving them with the hush of idle machines and the muted rumble of the Valkyrie's heart and the deck plates. Greer waited a beat longer, watching Marin's breathing steady, before holding out a hand. Not a command, just an offer of balance. She stared at it for a long moment before letting her fingers curl into his, Using the help to lever herself to her feet, she swayed once, teeth gritted, but straightened with a quiet, defiant breath. Halloran was a step behind them when they left the medical bay, his boots whispering against the deck sole. His silence felt heavy, like the kind of quiet that carried calculation in it, not care. Greer marked the sound of every footfall, every subtle shift of weight, but kept his eyes forward, his pace steady enough that Merrin could lean if she needed to. He was aware of Halloran the way a soldier felt a hostile scope in the dark. Not confirmed, but impossible to ignore. They turned down a narrow corridor after exiting the lift, with softer lighting and the ship's hum almost intimate underfoot. Merrin walked like every step cost her something. Greer adjusted his stride to match hers. A quiet shield between her and whatever else stopped the corridor. He didn't speak until the noise of the medical bay faded entirely behind them. "You keep walking like this, they'll ground you," he murmured, low enough for her ears only. "Let me take the weight, kid. You've already carried too much today." Merrin's lips twitched, not quite a smile, more an echo of one long forgotten. "Not a kid," she rasped. There was no real bite behind it. She let her shoulder brush his for just a second, then pulled back like the admission had cost her something, too. Behind them, Halloran let out the smallest exhale. Not fatigue. Not concern. Something else. Greer caught it without looking, storing it away with every other tick and tell. A man playing the role of silent comrade, but never once moving to help, never once easing the load off a wounded girl's shoulders. Just watching. Always watching. They reached the junction for crew quarters, the corridor splitting into low, narrow wings marked with stenciled numbers. Greer slowed, shifted slightly, making Halloran choose which side to take. A test. Simple and subtle. A real brother-in-arms would step ahead, scout the way clear, and make sure no one walked into another mess after the day they'd had. Halloran didn't. He lingered at their backs, letting them take point, shadowy, silent, and weightless except for the unease he left trailing behind him like smoke. Halloran stood just far enough away to look harmless, too far to help, too close to forget. Okay. Alrighty. Silent watch. The passageway hummed low with the heartbeat of the ship, steady and unbroken, like a pulse meant to remind everyone aboard that Valkyrie was alive and moving, carrying them between the stars. Wait 1 second. The lighting had been dimmed for the ship's night, leaving long shadows spilling across the deck. Greer walked half a step behind Merrin, the sound of their boots muffled on the non-slick plating. Her stride was uneven, stubbornly measured, like a soldier refusing to show weakness even when every breath hurt. He didn't comment. He just stayed close enough to catch her if her knees buckled, one calloused hand hovering near her shoulder but never intruding. They stopped at the compartment assigned to her. The hatch was unremarkable, just another steel door among rows of bunks meant for rotating squads. But Greer gave it a long, hard look before palming the panel. He swept the space first, his eyes flicking over corners, bunks, lockers, and even the ventilation grate. Old instincts died harder than men like him ever did. When he was satisfied it was empty, he turned back to her and gave a short nod. "Go on," he said, quietly, voice carrying the weight of orders but none of their bark. It was a tone meant to steady, not to push. Merrin hesitated in the hatchway, exhaustion etched across her face like carbon scoring on old armor. She clutched her dog tags in one hand, the knuckles white, as if they were the only thing tethering her to something real. Finally, she stepped inside. The compartment smelled faintly of antiseptic and Durasteel polish, impersonal and temporary. The bunk sheets were standard issue, thin and stiff, but they were still better than dirt, blood, and screaming nerves. She sank onto the lower rack with a soft exhale, holding herself stiffly to keep from aggravating her ribs. For a moment, she seemed to be somewhere far away, lost in a haze of memory and pain, eyes fixed on nothing. Greer crouched in front of her, forearms braced on his knees, his weathered face lined with quiet understanding. "You made it back," he said, steady as stone. "That's what counts tonight." Her lips trembled just once before she pressed them flat again. She nodded, small and sharp, like she couldn't trust her voice. Greer reached out, not to comfort, not like a parent or a friend, but like a Marine checking a comrade's kit, and tapped the tags curled in her fist. "Hold on to these," he murmured. "You've got people who'd tear apart half the galaxy to see you come home. Don't forget that." He stood, shifting to lean against the bulkhead near the hatch, his arms folded, his presence filling the small compartment. He didn't leave. He didn't speak again unless she stirred. The silence was deliberate, heavy but protective, wrapping around both of them like a shield no one else could breach. Marin eventually lay down, turning onto her uninjured side with a wince, clutching the tags close. Her breaths were uneven at first, like she was fighting to keep them steady, but over time they softened and slowed. Greer stayed where he was, a sentinel in the doorway, watching the hatch and the corridor beyond with the same hard-eyed vigilance he'd held on a dozen battlefields. He would stand there as long as it took, until she slept deep, until his instincts quit growling about shadows and snakes in their midst, until someone else came that he trusted to take over. Marines didn't leave their own. Not in a firefight, not on a starship, not when the kid was still fighting to breathe past pain and memory. Greer knew there'd be worse days ahead. He could feel it in his bones, same as she could. But tonight, on this quiet deck under dimmed lights, she had space to rest. And as long as he had blood in his veins and a blaster at his side, nothing and no one would touch her. Shadow was on the watch. The ship had quieted to a low, steady hum, the kind of silence that pressed at the ears until it became a presence all its own. Valkyrie's frame groaned now and then, settling under the measured pull of artificial gravity, bulkheads thrumming faintly as if she, too, were drawing a long, deliberate breath after the chaos of the day. Greer leaned against the frame of the bunkroom hatch, his arms folded, boots planted shoulder width apart as his gaze lingered on the figure curled beneath standard-issue blankets. Marin hadn't moved since the weight of exhaustion finally dragged her under. He'd stayed until her breathing evened out, until the tiny flickers of pain across her brow had eased, replaced by the slack surrender of sleep she couldn't fight off any longer. The medics had done their part. Now it was his turn. He didn't like the way his gut had tightened earlier, a coil of unease that hadn't let up, even now. Combat instincts honed over decades told him to pay attention to that pull. It wasn't the colony skirmish gnawing at him. Those were ghosts he knew how to bury for a while. No, this was different. It followed them up from the surface, stalked the edges of the hangar and the medbay. Halloran. The man had lingered, too long, too still, watching without watching the way operators did when they were mapping routes in their heads. Greer had clocked it, same as IT had. He'd seen it in the captain's narrowing eyes as they'd parted ways. But veil or no veil, they had no proof, no pretext to pull Halloran aside without setting off alarms they couldn't afford to ring. Not yet. Greer shifted his weight, straightening, his eyes scanning the corridor. It was quiet. Most of the squad had racked out already, exhaustion knocking them flat. That should have let him relax, but it didn't. He glanced back at Marin one last time, her face half hidden by the blanket, and made his choice. She wouldn't wake easily, not tonight, and he'd be damned before he left her unguarded. He stepped out, the hatch hissing closed behind him, and started on the passage until he found the figure he trusted most on the deck. "Beck," he called softly, a Marine's voice pitched to carry just far enough. The sergeant straightened from where he was leaning against the bulkhead, his eyes alert despite the late hour. "I need a set of eyes on Dursa's door," Greer told him. No preamble, no room for question in his tone. Beck didn't blink. "Trouble?" Greer's jaw flexed. He let a breath out slowly. Not yet, but something stinks, and I'm not ignoring it. His gaze cut down the hall the way Halloran had disappeared earlier. He met Vec's eyes again, his own gaze hard. You see anyone hovering too close, you log it. You don't challenge unless you have to. I want her left the criff alone while she sleeps. Yes, sir, Vec replied, already straightening to take position near the hatch. No questions, no wasted words, just quiet, steady readiness. Greer nodded once, a silent thanks between men who'd shared enough firefights not to need more. He lingered a moment longer, scanning the corridor himself, every instinct still wound tight. Only when he was sure Marin was under watch and the deck was secure did he finally allow himself to step away. Even then, his stride was measured, not relaxed. He'd sent the report up to IT before he wrecked out, and tomorrow he'd keep an eye even closer on Halloran. Something was coiling there, waiting, and Greer had learned long ago to trust the feeling. He only hoped they caught the scent of it before it bared its teeth. The quiet before dawn. The ship's engines thrummed a steady counterpoint to the silence, a low vibration threading through deck and bulkhead alike. Somewhere forward, the faint murmur of a night watchman's footsteps traced the corridor, soft enough that Marin almost thought she imagined it. She had slept, or something like it, in fits and starts, every cycle of breath edged with discomfort, every shallow doze, tangled in fragments of memory and heat and crimson light. Her body had known worse nights, but few carried this particular weight. The shadow of another Force user closing in, the hum of her own saber meeting a stranger's with intent behind it that felt too familiar. She shifted on the narrow bunk, her breath catching when a bruised rib pulled tight against the thin fabric of her borrowed fatigues. The sheets beneath her were still crisp, barely disturbed despite the hours that had passed. It felt wrong, somehow, like she hadn't truly let herself rest at all. Every time her eyes closed, the fight replayed in her mind, sharper than any hollow bid, looping over and over in the relentless clarity. The flare of the other woman's blade, the jarring impact of a counter-strike, the moment she'd felt that icy knot in the Force. A predator recognizing prey. A sigh escaped her before she could stop it, quiet and raw. Korriban. That night on Catan, other than those, she hadn't faced trained Force users often. Not like this. Not in the way that left this kind of echo. The thought that pulled a frown to her lips as she stared up at the darkened ceiling bulkhead, her eyes tracing the shadowed grid of pipes and rivets. She drew in a breath, slow and measured, as though the ritual alone might calm her, but it only skimmed the surface of her nerves. We have an ad starting in 2 minutes and 34 seconds. With another sigh, she pushed herself upright, her bare feet barely whispering against the deck sole as she swung her legs over the side. The act made her ribs throb, a muted fire looking at her side, but she ignored it. She'd learned long ago to work around pain. Settling on the cold deck, she folded her legs beneath her, back braced against the edge of the bunk, her shoulders straight despite their ache. The position was familiar and grounding, serving as much as a defense as an attempt to meditate. Maybe if I can hold on long enough, focus deep enough, the Force will tell me what I'm missing. It took longer than usual to peel away the noise of her own mind. Long minutes of controlled breathing, slow and deliberate, in through her nose and out through parted lips, until the tension eased a fraction, until the memory loop dulled to a whisper instead of a shout. Gradually, the hum of the ship fell away, replaced by a strange, weighted stillness. She let her breath lead her into that internal space, the one tied to hard lessons, long nights, and moments where survival left more choice than chance, or felt more choice than chance. There we go. But the usual blank canvas of meditation shifted. Shapes bled through the dark, soft edges resolving into a scene she knew as well as her own heartbeat. Crisp air, faint smoke from a campfire, the earthy scent of leaves crushed under boots. The breath she drew in next hitched, catching on the sudden knot in her throat. Home, or something close enough that it ached to even see it. And there he was, Jarius, Standing by the fire, his gaze fixed on her with quiet expectation like he'd been waiting a long time. She took a step forward, then another, hesitant despite the fierce pull in her chest to run into his arms. At the last moment, she reached for his hands instead, gripping them hard like a lifeline. His calloused palms felt real and steady. He blinked, a flicker of confusion in his expression before recognition warmed it, and he drew her in carefully, an arm wrapping around her shoulders with a tenderness that nearly undid her. For a heartbeat, she let herself cling before pain flared where bruises and burns met the movement, forcing a sharp breath through her teeth. He pulled back, frowning deeply, his gaze sweeping over her injuries, over the marine fatigues hanging loosely on her frame. Marika, what happened? His voice was tight and protective, and then his expression shifted, a spark of wry humor glinting as he thumbed the edge of her rank tab. And what is Card up to now? A laugh escaped her, soft and tired, almost incredulous. Card, Talon, Ethan, Greer, and they somehow roped Admiral Connors in too. She shook her head at the memory. Some brilliant idea to run an exchange program with the Marines. That was months ago now. She let go of his hands long enough to lower herself onto a nearby stump, and he sank to the ground beside her, still unwilling to release her fingers fully. She took a breath, the words feeling heavier than she expected. You should know. Bevan's dead. We finally cornered him on Korriban after Coruscant. She swallowed hard. We thought killing him would stop Kirtzad, but they're still pushing, still trying to dig claws back into Katani space, with Sith backing and Force users on their side. I'm gonna pause there because we're about to have an ad again. I'll see you guys back in a minute and a half. Please go get yourselves a drink of water, because I'm gonna do the same. Alright, my friends, we are back from that ad, and we are nearing the end of the chapter. Probably gonna finish here in the next 10 or 15 minutes. Jairus' frown deepened, but his hand rose to her cheek, grounding her, a simple gesture that loosened something tight in her chest. He's gone. That's what matters, he said gently. She wished it were that simple. Her fingers turned upward in his grip, her palms open, and the story spilled out. The mission, the colony, the Marines lost, the duel that had left her burned and shaken. He listened in silence, his gaze never leaving hers. When she faltered unsure, his voice cut through softly but firmly. You've taken on more than you thought you could, but you didn't fall. You're stronger than you know. He leaned closer, his brown eyes locking with her blue. But, Marin, you cannot walk this path alone, not the way I tried to, not the way you almost did after my death. There are hands willing to steady you. Let them. Her breath trembled as she nodded, the old instincts to prove herself fighting against everything she knew he was right about. She clutched the dark blue tags at her throat, her thumb worrying over their worn engraving. They had anchored her through loss and fear alike, and now they burned in her grip as if daring her to deny the truth he spoke. She breathed into it, feeling the weight of old wounds, stubborn pride, and the drive to face every threat on her own. And then, slowly and painfully, she let some of it go. When she opened her eyes again, his smile was soft and proud. You did it, Marika, as I knew you would. His arms wrapped around her one last time, warm and solid, before the campfire began to dim, the scent of leaves thinning into nothing. His voice lingered even as his presence faded. I'll always be here, daughter, but you won't need to fight everything alone. Not anymore. She surfaced from the vision with a shaky breath, a dampness on her cheeks from tears she hadn't realized had fallen. For the first time in too long, her chest felt less tight, her mind quieter, a fragile calm settling over her mind. She drew her knees up, resting her arms against them and letting that feeling root deep in her chest. She wasn't alone. That truth might be hard to remember when battle came, but she could try. When sleep finally came again, it was deeper and steadier. The shadows in her dreams no longer hunted her. The veil is heavier for those who return. Veil Doctrine, Oral Maxim 20. Coming back from the fire is its own burden. The fallen carry no more weight, but the living bear their names, their silence, their ghosts. Survival is not release, it is a quiet vow to continue breathing in their place. And that, my friends, is the end of Chapter 6 of Steps into the Past. As always, thank you so much for coming with me tonight on our journey as we continue through our story. I hope you enjoyed. Please have yourselves an awesome evening. I hope to see you all at my next stream next Wednesday, which will be Star Wars The Old Republic, as well as my usual shenanigans. And my next stream after that will be the following Sunday for workshop, where I'll be working on more chapters for Steps into the Past. I hope to see you all on any or all of those streams if you so desire. Please have yourselves an awesome evening. Take care of yourselves and get some well-needed rest. I am going to take a real quick look to see if we have anybody that we can go say hi to. So please stick around for just a moment if you don't mind. So, alright. All right, my friends, we are going to go say hi to my friend Ogle. And I would greatly appreciate if you guys could hang around for that raid. Spread the love around a little bit, the cozy vibes. If you're a subscriber to the channel, you can grab that first raid message. And if you are a follower of the channel or just lurking and enjoying the story, please feel free to grab that one. I honestly do hope that you enjoyed the story tonight. It's not as cozy as I was hoping for, but hopefully you still got cozy vibes out of it. Unfortunately, the stories at this point in Marin's arc are not exactly all that cozy. So, give me just 1 second. I get this set up real quick. Alright, my friends. Okay. Have an awesome night, my friends. Take care of yourselves. Get some water. Take your meds. Have a snack if you need that. And get some good rest. I'm going to do that here in just a few minutes. Thanks so much for being here tonight. I really appreciate you all.